Well, good evening again, and welcome to the September 23rd meeting of Glendale City Council. May we have the roll call, please?
Councilmember Devine?
Here.
Friedman?
Here.
Najarian?
Here.
Weaver?
Here.
Mayor Sinanian?
Here. Today's flag salute will be led by Councilmember Devine.
Please join with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please remain standing for today's invocation. This evening we pray for the continued health and vitality of our city. We give thanks for the citizens who give freely of their time in support of our community. We pray for safety of those who serve to protect our great nation, as well as pray for the safe return of our men and women serving overseas. Let us reflect on all that we have been given as citizens and residents of this fair city and actively seek ways to give back. We pray for all this and that our council and community be guided by principles of fairness and cooperation during tonight's meeting and always. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. Clerk. May we have the report, please?
The agenda for September 23, 2014 regular meeting of the Glendale City Council was posted on Thursday, September 18, 2014 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Thank you. What's next?
Presentation and appointments. 3A, agenda preview for meetings on Tuesday, September 30th, 2014.
Thank you. Ms. Beers?
Mayor Sinanian, members of the City Council, for the Glendale Housing Authority, we have no business agenda items. We do have a special meeting of the Glendale Successor Agency. One item, Director of Economic Development. This is regarding brokerage and auctioning services for agency-owned properties and assets. And that's in the afternoon to commence at 3 p.m. In the evening for the City Council meeting to commence at 6 p.m., we have a number of consent items. Director of Public Works, this is regarding Wilson, Harvey, and Broadway intersection traffic signal modification. Director of Community Services and Parks regarding the fiscal year 2014-15 funds from Employment Development Department for layoff aversion programs. CIO regarding competitively bid RFP 2012 to complete phase 2 of the building wiring project. Also, CIO purchase competitively bid maintenance and support for the city storage systems. Lastly, for consent is General Manager of Glendale Water and Power, and this is Power Disclosure Report that comes before the City Council. We have one item under adoption of ordinances. This is amendments to Title 30 of the GMC, and it's relating to the precise plan of design overlay zone. We have action items, City Treasurer, the annual report from our City Treasurer, and General Manager of Glendale Water and Power, award of contract to Beta Engineering for the Grandview Substation Reconstruction Project. And that concludes my report, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Beers. What's next?
3B, presentation by Police Chief Robert Castro for a 30-year service award to Lieutenant Bruce Fox, with a special presentation from Character and Ethics Project, Sharon Townsend.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. It's my pleasure tonight to take a few moments to present to you Lieutenant Bruce Fox for his 30-year anniversary with the city of Glendale. A little bit about Bruce. He was hired as a police officer in September of 1984. He was promoted to the rank of sergeant in 1995 and to his current rank of lieutenant in 2002. Some of the assignments that Lieutenant Fox has worked throughout his career is he's worked in patrol, at the Galleria, as a school resource officer at Toll Middle School. He worked in our COPS unit as a public information officer, Explorer program coordinator. He worked as the commander of our Professional Standards Bureau. He worked as the commander of our Special Investigations Unit, and most recently he has been the XO working out of the Chief's office, assisting me in my transition here into the department. Bruce was one of the department's first DARE officers. He was selected by LAPD as one of the first and only outside officers from another agency to actually help teach the DARE program in the LAPD DARE school. He also was chosen to take a 10-day trip to Japan, where he taught DARE in Japan with a cadre of officers from the LA area. One of the things that stands out in his career is when he was the commander of our Professional Standards Bureau, he assisted in a year-and-a-half process where they processed over 200 backgrounds that led to the hiring of 78 full-time employees for the department. He has received Distinguished Service Awards, divisional commendations, and he was chosen as the Officer of the Year from the Kiwanis Club for his work with DARE. Bruce has developed relationships in the city and the community with service on the following boards and committees. He was the president of the Character and Ethics Project, a board member of the Campbell Center, and also served on the GPOA board. Bruce, I can tell you, is an extremely dedicated employee. He is not just a member of the city employment staff, but he truly believes in this community. During my transition here, he has been absolutely vital in assisting me to learn the nuances of the community, the various groups, as well as all the neighborhoods. And as I've gone out and talked to different community groups, religious groups, they all comment on how they really miss Bruce not being out in the field, but actually me taking him up into the fourth floor, because he has done such an outstanding job in really setting a tone for others to follow in terms of what does it really mean to be a community-based police officer in a community-based police department. He is an example of balancing family life, the demands of the job, and knowing what it takes to go above and beyond to provide exceptional leadership and service to the community. So it's my great pleasure tonight to introduce to you Lieutenant Bruce Fox for his 30 years of service, and also to say with some heavy heart that he's retiring at the end of the month also. So he has had some opportunities from additional job opportunities, so we are going to miss him, but we thank him for his 30 years of dedicated service to this community. Lieutenant Bruce Fox.
Lieutenant Fox, would you say a few words?
Sir, I'd love to, actually. I told this story earlier, and some people know it, but I was a 14-year-old young man going to Clark Junior High School in La Crescenta when I was called into the counselor's office, and they had a form there that you had to fill out, and it said, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And I said, I want to be a Glendale police officer at 14 years of age. And my counselor goes, "Okay," and she wrote down police officer. I go, no. I said I want to be a Glendale police officer. So this has been a long dream of mine to be standing here, and it's kind of hard to see it go by the wayside. But I really want to thank you all for your leadership. And most of all, I really wanted to take this opportunity tonight to thank the community. This is all I've ever wanted to do, is serve this town, serve this city. It's been great. I remember things like, a couple things stand out in my mind. Number one was the 1992 riots when LA was burning to the ground, and I was at 7-Eleven and people were shaking my hand and buying me sodas and thanking me for not letting Glendale be like LA. I remember the weekend after Chuck Lazaretto was murdered, people come up to me in restaurants and praying with me and shaking my hand and patting me on the back and buying me lunch. This is truly, we've captured something here in Glendale, and you all know it. That's why you chose to serve, but it's a little bit special. We're right here amongst LA, but we have our own enclave, and we still have family values, and we still cling together in crisis, like the chief mentioned. So it's been a great honor to serve here for the last 30 years, and I just want to thank you all for the opportunity to serve the community.
Thank you, Lieutenant. And we have a special presentation by Sharon Townsend of the Character and Ethics Project.
Thank you. I had the honor and the privilege of first meeting Bruce 7 years ago when we both came on the Character and Ethics Board together. He has been my ethical partner in helping me through my journeys. We've had many, many discussions about ethics, about living and walking our Christian faith, walking it and not talking it, and being a role model to other people in this community. So on behalf of the Character and Ethics Project, we have a quote by Gandhi: "The things that will destroy us are politics without principle, pleasure without conscience, wealth without work, knowledge without character, business without morality, science without humanity, and worship with sacrifice." I can attest to that Bruce has been a role model for all of us in this city, and we should want to be more like him. So Bruce, on behalf of the Character and Ethics Project, thank you for your 30 years of service to the city of Glendale, the Glendale Police Department, and I'm so glad you finally said yes to being president to Character and Ethics.
Thank you very much.
So thank you, Lieutenant Fox. It's obviously a great fortune to serve out your career in the career that you wanted to be in from when you were 14. That's excellent. But more importantly, I think it's a great fortune for the city of Glendale to have police officers like yourself. I mean, all the things that were said about you, and it comes from a broad enough spectrum of people for it to carry a lot of weight. And too bad you have to retire. Thankfully, we have one of the safest cities in all of U.S., and I don't think we take that for granted for a single second. And it's due to the work of fine police officers like yourselves. So thank you. We have a nice plaque for you that I would like Councilmember Devine to present to you. We also have a box and I assume it's a check, which Councilmember Najarian will present to you.
For you, and we keep tradition. This goes to your. Is your wife here? Yes. Would she stand up? I'll give this to her directly, so maintain the chain of evidence.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
What's next?
Under consent items, the following are routine and may be acted upon by one motion. Any member of council or the audience requesting separate consideration may do so by making such request before motion is proposed. 4A, minutes of the regular City Council meeting of Tuesday, September 9th, 2014.
Thank you. And we have a speaking card for item 4B, so I will be pulling that off the consent calendar. Will someone otherwise move the remainder of the calendar?
So moved. Second.
Can we have roll call, please?
Councilmember Devine,
Yes.
Friedman,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Weaver, Mayor Sinanian.
Yes. Item 4B.
4B, General Manager of Glendale Water and Power regarding design build of cooling tower number 4 repairs at the Grayson Power Plant in connection with specification number 3556. B1, resolution adopting plan and spec and authorizing solicitation proposals.
Does anyone like to
I
that
can
issue or?
address the issue for you.
Okay, why don't we take this, the speaker, Mike Mohill. How much time do you need, Mr. Mohill? Okay, you have 2 minutes.
Good evening, council members, Mayor Kinsiniani, and the viewing audience. I remember about a year and a half, 2 years ago, when I came before the City Council, and the issue was the Grayson plant and how we're not funding it. And I was told by council members that we had plenty of money and there's nothing wrong with the Grayson plant. And here we are today, needing repairs. In the meantime, you go ahead and you transfer money out of GWP that should be used for the Grayson plant to the general fund to pay for our salaries and pensions. So today, the Grayson plant is crumbling, like I had mentioned here over a year ago. But council shrugged me off. Here we are today, fixing a problem that should have been resolved a year and a half ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mohill.
I have a
yes,
question.
Mr. Najarian?
Mr. Zern. So my only question is, just last month we decided to have an IRB, is that the correct? IRP
Correct.
performed, which would give council direction as to what the future of basically what the future of our electrical agency would be.
Right.
And if the report were to come back, and if this council were to decide at that point that we are in a better position to be a power transmitter, Is that the correct term? In other
Power generator?
Not to generate, but to
Receive? So instead of
generating
power,
it, we're just
would purchase all of it.
purchasing it.
Correct.
Would this money be for naught? Would the repairs to this generator be for naught?
No, not Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Najarian, not in this particular case. We're looking at, let's just say IRP-wise, and I'm only forecasting ahead that either the plant is going to be retired or the plant is going to be repowered. Either way, we'd need to do this because the primary driving factor for this particular issue tonight is safety, both OSHA and employee safety and seismic safety. This is pretty much a 100% wood structure, and we have had issues with being able to access it to do day-to-day maintenance. It will be somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 years either way before we actually make a decision. It would be 5 to, or even could be even longer if we decide to retire the plant. If we were going to repower the plant, minimum 5 years. It could be even longer than that. So this is something we need to do. As long as we're going in to do the major safety repairs, we're doing a couple of other repairs as well, just to make that cooling unit safe and sound for the future. So no, every expenditure we make at Grayson from now and into the future, we're considering what that expenditure means in relation to the possibility that plant is not even going to be here or is not going to be in its current iteration.
All right, that satisfies me.
Mr. Mayor, it's too bad Mr. Mulhill already left without getting your response.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure about what was said a year and a half ago, but Grayson Power Plant, as you all know, is a very old plant that has needed ongoing repairs. It's the reason we brought forward to you the concept that we look at repowering that plant or retiring it because it is beyond its useful life. So we've known that plant has needed work on an ongoing basis. If you recall, 2 years ago, we just didn't quite have the money to do that because of the financial situation of the utility. It's a little bit different today.
And it's the least efficient source of energy that we have.
It is the absolute most expensive source of power that we have in our portfolio today.
And yeah, we're not hiding that fact. It's out there, everyone knows, and we're the first ones that are concerned.
Absolutely. This council has known that for quite some time, much longer than a year. I know that.
Okay. No more questions. Do we have a motion?
I'll move 4B1.
Second.
Can we have a roll call, please?
Council members Devine,
Yes.
Friedman,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Mayor Sinanian.
Yes. Next item.
City Council and staff comments.
Okay, I'm going to start out today on an important issue that is going to impact our city irrespective of how we move forward, and we should figure out and really analyze and think about how we're going to move forward on this issue because it's here. The mayor of the city of Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti, has announced an initiative to gradually raise the salaries, the minimum salary, minimum wages in the city of Los Angeles over the next several years. And at this time, Mayor Garcetti has reached out to the major municipalities, if not all the municipalities in the LA County, for support on this issue, because it does make sense for something like that to move forward in unison in one geographic area, which Los Angeles County really is. Of course, as far as our decision on this issue, it has to be based on the interests of the city of Glendale, and for that reason, we need to do our due diligence. We need to, on some level, cooperate with our immediately neighboring cities, Pasadena and Burbank, because we are more of a sort of a block, a geographic block that has to act on some level in unison, and figure out how we're going to act. So to that effect, I've asked our city manager and our staff to prepare an in-depth report on this issue. I've asked our staff to use the resources available to the city of Los Angeles, which are not available to us otherwise, which have been so graciously been extended to us by Mayor Garcetti, such as an economist, which the city of Los Angeles has hired specifically for this purpose, and Mayor Garcetti told me that he's willing to make that person available to us and whatever other resources they have. So again, I just want everyone to be aware that this issue is here. It's here to stay, and there's some indication that the City of Pasadena supports it. The City of Santa Monica has expressed its support for it already. So we should do our due diligence and prepare that report. Thank you. And I can go to my colleagues, or I can continue if I have any events. Yes, Ms. Friedman.
There were a lot of events. I'm not going to talk about them because I think they'll be covered, but I have two, I'm sure, between everybody who was at all of the events. But I have a couple issues to talk about. One, kind of interesting timing. When Councilmember Devine was first elected to office, one of the things that she brought up was potentially doing a moratorium or a ban on new swimming pool construction in the city of Glendale. And the council decided not to go forward with that discussion for a variety of reasons. Interestingly enough, about 2 weeks ago in the LA Times, I think it was on the Saturday section, there was an article that one of the universities, I think it was, did a study to look at swimming pool water usage and what effect it has on the drought and just on people's water use. And they were able to do an analysis that compared having a swimming pool to having a grass lawn or to a drought-resistant lawn, and also compared to a swimming pool with a cover. Very interesting. So what they found was that having a swimming pool without a cover, I think, was the highest water usage, but almost tied with having a grass lawn for that particular area. So they were maybe it was the grass lawn higher. I can't remember. So yeah, sorry, the grass lawn was higher. So the grass lawn used more water than having a swimming pool, because you fill a swimming pool up, right? But then you basically put, some amount of water into it from evaporation, but you're not filling it every few weeks unless you have a horrible leak or something. But with a grass lawn, you're putting water on, 3 times a week, sometimes more. A drought-resistant yard was down, you jumped down several notches to a drought-resistant yard, and then below that, in terms of water usage, was a swimming pool with a cover. So for a certain amount of area in your yard, surprising to me that having a swimming pool with a pool cover used less water than having even a drought-resistant landscape. So my suggestion, and what I'd like to ask my colleagues for us to look at, would be for us to add swimming pool covers to the same sort of incentive program that we give for other types of drought and conservation efforts. So maybe it's a $100 allowance if somebody buys a new swimming pool cover, whatever it is. We can have staff bring it back. I don't know what these things cost, but if they seem to save quite a bit of water, and we give incentives to foster conservation for a number of things, for appliances, for removing turf, etc. It makes sense to me, given the amount of water that this potentially could save, for us to discuss this, adding this to our incentive list to GWP. Does anybody have any interest in supporting that? Just a discussion of it?
I'll support it.
Okay. So we can see, we don't have to, the way that these incentive programs usually work is we budget a certain amount each year. So maybe you put $10,000 or $5,000 towards it. It's first come, first serve, whatever, but we can discuss those different options. We also could look at requiring swimming pool covers for new swimming pool construction. So that's something else we might want to look at the same time. It's up to my colleagues' pleasure. If you're spending $50,000 or whatever it costs to put a swimming pool in, adding that cover, I would think, would be a nominal cost. So that's something else I think we should look at. Is anybody interested in that? Having that as part
what was
of
the second part of it again?
The second part would be to maybe require swimming pool covers for new swimming pool installations. Because I assume, I've never built a swimming pool, but I'm assuming you're looking at $30,000 and up, right?
Oh, yeah, there's
more. They're saying, oh, that's cheap. So it's a huge expense. The cover has got to be a small percentage, point something percent of that cost. So if we mandate that, for one thing, people could recoup that cost in terms of their water savings over the years, but it would be something for us to maybe mitigate that effect that Councilmember Devine was concerned about, rightly concerned about, for new swimming pool construction.
The swimming pool covers can go into the thousands of dollars.
They can.
Yeah, they can.
It depends on the type. And I think there are types that are sort of like giant plastic bags that are cheap that people could put on.
In my pool, I would put the cover on in October, November, open it up in April, having not run the pool pump more than 2 hours a day, adding no chlorine or anything to the pool, no water to the pool, and I would open the cover, and it was just like when I closed it.
Well, that's the other really good point about swimming pool covers is that they probably save quite a bit of energy. So this is something that maybe
Energy and water.
could consider to be out of our energy conservation budget as well.
Any water cannot evaporate. It just settles back into the pool.
Okay?
I know, if I can comment on that, I know that we've had a swimming pool cover and then we haven't had one, and the loss of water is extreme when you don't have one. And I know that they're not that expensive. I mean, I don't know.
Well, if you have automatic cover, it costs
Well,
more.
that's right.
I see the
The
city
other
attorney-
ones are, yeah, they're not expensive at all. So I would agree with you.
Mr. Garcia?
Oh, I know he's looking at me like, don't allow this to turn into an actual conversation.
Oh, sorry.
So we will
That's a
not do that.
message.
But I would like to also discuss, we're making it a requirement for new installations. Would anybody second that part of the
I'll
discussion?
second
Okay. Thank you. Secondly, one of the things that people complain about when they do construction in the city is the time it takes, the amount of inspections we have to do, the cost, all of that. I understand that in many cities we allow architects, now licensed architects, not just homeowners, to self-certify certain parts of the building procedure. Not everything, but that certain things can be certified by a licensed architect if they place a bond and guarantee to pay a certain penalty if they, fib or lie, or if they're caught certifying something that actually wasn't adequate. It seems like that's something that would save staff time for us to not have to send inspectors out for every step of the way. And if it's being done successfully in other cities, I think we should look at instituting that here in Glendale. And lastly, I just want to wish everybody a happy Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. It starts tomorrow night.
Okay, thank you. And I join in the felicitations. Happy Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. And one issue that is sort of correlated to what Ms. Friedman alluded to just a second ago about the inspections and self-certification, but not quite the self-certification aspect of it. All of us, council members and management, were, I don't want to say inundated, but pretty close to that, with a number of letters from various residents and individuals, including the owner and operator of Gaucho's Village, Kevin Aksaki. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing the last name, about some delay in the process of the establishment of the new location, La Cubana, and I understand that issue is really resolved. I hope that's the case, but I would like staff to be able to address this issue a bit.
Certainly, sir. Just very briefly, and I'll certainly defer to the city attorney if I start to veer too far off into the weeds. Long story short, the Gauchos Village, because of private transactions among landlord and tenant, was moving out of their previous location onto Maryland. As the city of Glendale, we were extraordinarily excited about bringing an activity generator to that stretch of Maryland. Reached out. I believe there was the decision on the part of the tenant to use the expedited plan check process and to fully avail themselves of our concierge service. And indeed, we had a project manager assigned to the project that would literally guide them and usher them through the process. I think what happens in this particular case is a recognition that the remodeling, not all restaurants are created equal, not all industrial kitchens are created equal, and that the level of complexity and professionalism that is needed for a kitchen remodel, for a restaurant kitchen remodel, is not something for the faint of heart, and usually requires somebody who is quite a professional, somebody who is expert, does it for a living. That was not executed in this particular case, and while our project managers and our staff who would come in on their days off, stay late, make sure that they were trying to provide on literal standby waiting to do inspections, while try as they might to facilitate, it is not their job, nor can it be, to actually do the work for the tenant. Tenants got to do that work. We are there to make sure that when they are ready, we execute the public processes forthwith. We were able and ready to do that up to and including until the final day when we were waiting for fire safety, life safety systems to work, and not just be installed, but actually be functional. And when they were, within minutes, we were signed off. So I know that there was a tremendous amount of frustration from that particular operator. I was a bit frustrated myself that they would seek to cut off the nose to spite the face and say that they received horrible service when in fact there was not a lot of responsiveness on their side in terms of responding to calls and reciprocating with getting through the process as our staff literally was calling them to bring them along. I can tell you that your Building and Safety Department or Division and your Fire Prevention Bureau did exceptional work to bring them along. And now at this point, they are open, or at least they have their temporary certificate of occupancy so they can open to the public. We wish them only the very best. We want to see them succeed. It does us no good to have non-performing businesses, and we hope that they feel the same way.
Thank you, Mr. Ochoa. So was there a relocation fee paid, or was it by?
No, this was a private transaction.
So whatever would have been done between the private entities that are involved.
That's my understanding. I think it was, as I say, just a matter of private landlord, private tenant. We were very happy to facilitate. As you know, you saw today in our Economic Development Corporation meeting, we are out of the redevelopment business and wholeheartedly into the economic development business, meaning we are facilitators and we bring people along. Unfortunately, we cannot guarantee or warranty what brokers tell tenants because that's not our business.
Right. And, it's a sensitive issue because we don't ever want to seem like we go out of our ways to facilitate a large business or a large corporation coming to Glendale, but when it's mid-size or small-size business that we're somehow neglecting them or, worse yet, creating artificial impediments to their establishment in Glendale. I don't believe that's the case. And this instance certainly doesn't appear to be a case of that happening.
It is actually, it reflects well on the tenant, and it reflects especially well on our project manager, Mr. Alan Castillo, that in the entire assortment of discussions, at the end of the day, the tenant was still appreciative of Alan's efforts. And as you say, we provide a level of service to the large relocations, large businesses, high-profile folks, but boy, do we still do that for the smaller businesses as well. And I think that's evident, and you saw it again this afternoon where the LA Economic Development Corporation was notifying you, City Council, that Glendale is one of the 5 finalists for large cities in LA County as Business-Friendly City of the Year. And in large part, it owes to that concierge level of service.
Very well. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ochoa. Next item is...
Wait.
No,
I'm not finished. My next item is my request of support on council for a resolution to eradicate bullying from America's schools. The U.S. Conference of Mayors has a special The Bully Project, and it would like to have our city, like many others, to pass this resolution sometime in October, and we have a sample text for the resolution, which we can circulate when it's finalized. But in principle, do we have support on the dais for
I would
this?
support that.
Thank you, Mr. Vine. And last but not least at all, today we're going to adjourn in the name of 4 very special individuals, and I'll name them all, and then I will introduce one of them, read their obituary, and allow Councilmember Weaver to speak about the 3 others. First person is Ruth J. Charles, then Jack Kabatek, H. Russell Smith, and Raymond Edwards. So allow me to take a few minutes to speak about Ruth J. Charles, known to many as Glendale's Mrs. Music, who passed away peacefully on September 5, 2014. She was 89 years old. Ruth was born in Birmingham, Michigan, June 26, 1925. In 1947, she and her late husband, Dick, both graduates of Michigan State University, moved to California. In 1950, they founded the Charles Music Store and Studios on Glendale Avenue. From the beginning, it was and remains today a highly successful and respected institution where, in the beginning, Dick concentrated on band instrument sales, and Ruth, in addition to running the store, taught piano and organ. Until recently, she continued to teach privately in her home, where she was positively impacted by the lives of many students, both adults and beginners. She received many prestigious community and religious awards, some of which she displayed on the walls of her large home. and connecting studio for students and guests to enjoy with her. Among her most current recognitions are Woman of the Year, Glendale Chamber of Commerce, Woman of Achievement, Glendale News Press, Community Service Award of 2001, Glendale Chamber of Commerce, Woman of Distinction Award, Seroptimist International, Distinguished Alumni Award, College of Arts and Letters, Michigan State University, Lifetime Achievement Award, Glendale City College, Human Kindness Award, Glendale Memorial Hospital. Ruth also served as president of the Women's Committee for the Glendale Symphony Orchestra during the time when Carmen Dragon was conductor and the events were held at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in Los Angeles. Her generous support of community and private foundations is legendary. She established music scholarship funds in both her husband's and her names at Michigan State University and Glendale Community College. In 2011, the Museum of Making Music in Carlsbad, California, founded and staffed by the National Association of Music Merchants, added a new wing to the museum, the Charles Museum Store, in memory of and honor of Dick and Ruth Charles for their dedication to the music products industry and profession and their continual contributions to music education. Ruth is survived by her two children, Richard E. Charles, Jr. of Pasadena, California, Joanne Mary Van Cleve of Newport Beach, California, two grandchildren, Shannon Lasowitz of Midlothian, Virginia, and Mark Montenegro of Long Beach, California, and one great-grandson, David Lasowitz, and her sister, Doris Presler of Bloomington, Illinois. She will be buried next to her husband in a private ceremony at the San Fernando Mission. A public memorial service will be held at Holy Family Catholic Church, 209 East Lomita Avenue, Glendale, California, on Friday, September 12th at 11 a.m. Well, I guess that's past. So we will today adjourn in memory of Ruth J. Charles. Mr. Weaver?
Yes, the first one is a dear friend of myself and my wife, Jack Kabachek. You know, we haven't met in a month, and we've lost some good people in this city. And what you learn when you read the bios, I knew him so well, yet I didn't know him. He grew up in West L.A., and when he was in the Army, he served as Sergeant of the Guard to General Douglas MacArthur and staff in Seoul, Korea. After the war, he returned to L.A. and graduated from USC. Good man. He applied for a job at KBC-TV in 1952, and then later he sold airtime on the radio, which became his business and career for the next 60 years. He spent more than 20 years with Westinghouse Broadcasting as the West Coast sales manager, and started his own company, Western Regional Broadcast Sales, representing radio stations up and down the coast, right up until the time he passed away. He was married to Gladys, who, thank goodness she's still around. They married in 1980. Over the next 54 years, he worked tirelessly to make his town better than before. He was with the Verdugo Woodlands Dad's Club, performing in and running the Father's Follies for many years, like I have done. Jack spent more than 20 years on the Glendale Symphony Board and worked tirelessly for the Red Cross and the Boy Scouts for over 25 years. And he worked with the Glendale Rotary Club. Remember that. He had a 62-year-old, he says, love affair with Gladys, and they were married for 55 years. And I'll sure miss him. Next is Raymond D. Edwards. I had the honor of meeting him back in 1963 when I sent him a letter. He was the head of Glendale Federal Savings and Loan, and I wanted his advice. I wanted to become a project manager. I wrote a letter, never thought the CEO would answer. He did, and I did meet with him. I'll never forget that. He was raised in Glendale, graduated Glendale High School, Glendale College, and UC Berkeley. When he graduated, he went into the Navy, received a commission and commanded a Navy vessel in the South Pacific during World War II. After he returned, got married, he started Glendale Federal Savings and Loan, and he was there for over 40 years. He began as a teller and retired as the chairman, president, and chief executive officer. Not a bad career, from teller to the CEO. He was the director of the Federal Home Loan Bank Board of San Francisco, served as president of the California Savings and Loan League, in addition to being president of the Conference of Federal Savings and Loan Associations. In Glendale, he supported communities in many ways: the Glendale Community College, United Way, Red Cross, Glendale Symphony Orchestra, Glendale Community Foundation, and the Glendale Kiwanis. And he was a great man, and he was a very giving person, the individual for his community, and I'll never forget that meeting with him. Third individual, H. Russell Smith. He passed away in Pasadena at the age of 100. You'll know at the end what I'm talking about, why I'm talking about him. He grew up in Whittier and went to Pomona College. He was a track star, student body president, graduated in 1936. He met his future partner, R. Stanton Avery, and they began a partnership in 1946, which was incorporated and is today known as the Avery Dennison Corporation, the company which moved to Glendale within the last year or so. We took them away from Pasadena. That's the company that makes the self-adhesive labels and label-making machinery that's used throughout the world, and it's a Fortune 500 company. When he was in the military, before the war, in 1937, he landed a job with the International Labor Office of the League of Nations in Geneva, Switzerland. He spent 3 years there. Came back to the United States, became assistant to the president at Blue Diamond Corporation, met his future wife that he married in 1942, only 3 weeks after he dated her for the first time. And they were married 67 years. Not bad, 3 weeks. Early in the marriage, he was commissioned as an officer in the United States Navy, and they spent 3 years in Washington, D.C. In addition to his executive roles over 4 decades at Avery Dennison, he served as a director of numerous other companies, including Security Pacific National Bank, Southern California Edison Company, Beckman Instruments, Title Insurance and Trust Company, Ken Smith Financial Company, Unitech Corporation. One of his defining traits, he had a belief in philanthropy, etc. He served as chairman of the boards of Pomona College, of the Los Angeles Philharmonic Association, of Community Television of Southern California, KCET, of Children's Hospital, and of the H. Russell Smith Foundation. He joined the Children's Hospital Foundation in 1960, and he credits that as his most remarkable, or the thing he will always remember. Was widely criticized from saving Children's Hospital from near bankruptcy and returned it back to fiscal strength. He is a member of the boards of the Los Angeles Music Center Operating Company, the Music Center Foundation, Polytechnic School in Pasadena, Orthopedic Hospital, the Independent College of Southern California, Public Broadcasting Services, the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce, the United Way of Los Angeles, the Claremont University Center, and a member of the Los Angeles Country Club and the Lincoln Club of Los Angeles. So he had a remarkable career in 100 years, and he left his company with his partner here in Glendale, California. So he had a remarkable life, and he'll be truly missed too, and I thought we should at least recognize him here tonight. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver.
Put one thing out I'd like to add. I was wondering if Mr. Friedman could talk about how it was in Tibet, China. You were there a week or two. What was it like there?
So I was invited to go with Jeff Talamantes, who's a council member and former mayor of Burbank, to Tibet to participate in a forum that was on ecologically and culturally sustainable development in Tibet. And we were invited to basically represent California. And I went and presented a speech that outlined California and Glendale's efforts to combat global warming and the California drought, and talked about basically regulations in California and in Glendale with an eye towards environmental sustainability. So I talked a lot about drought regulations, what we had done in the city of Glendale, about our renewable portfolio, about 2020, which we heard about earlier this afternoon, about what the state of California has done to combat global warming. What was interesting to me is that the Chinese officials that were there had told me that they had no idea about any of this. They didn't know there was a drought going on in California. They didn't know that we were taking drastic steps, that it was a crisis in Southern California. And they have similar drought issues in parts of China. And China's, as you probably have read, is, it is one of the leading users of coal, and they have huge pollution problems and problems with pollution in general, not just air pollution in China. And they don't really have, regulations the way we have regulations. They the government sort of sets up plants and sort of does what it wants. So for them to have governmental regulations like this was kind of, I wouldn't say a novel concept, but something that they didn't realize, that cities in the United States couldn't just do what they wanted in terms of how they power their city. So it was an interesting message to bring. I did get to see parts of Tibet. I got to go to Lhasa and another city, and I forgot its name, and saw what the Chinese have been doing there. When I think of Tibet, I had always thought of sort of barren hills with yaks, and I got to Lhasa. It's a city of 500,000 people, and it's a very modern city. So it was different than my impression. I know Ms. Devine has been there, so it was interesting to see. And of course, like the rest of China, it's developing at a very rapid rate. China in general, what you see, and I was in China before I went to Tibet, because you don't just fly to Tibet, you have to fly to Beijing and then go to China. There's scaffolds everywhere. They're building these huge skyscrapers, just everywhere, and banks of apartment buildings that are kind of as far as the eye can see, because they have a huge population and they're trying to keep up with their population growth. And Tibet, they're balancing expansion and growth in Tibet, along with wanting to, wanting to keep it very natural and parts of it unspoiled. And it was good to learn that they've preserved thousands and thousands of acres in Tibet and put them aside as national forests. At the same time, they do want to do some resource extraction in terms of mining. So they're trying to balance that, and at least show the rest of the world that they're trying to balance that and that this is an issue they take seriously. There were 33 nations participating. There was a congresswoman from Peru. There was what the equivalent of a senator would be from Ireland, and in fact, he was sort of elected by the Irish government. He heads what would be the equivalent of our Foreign Relations Committee that we have in the Senate. He's the head of that in Ireland, so he went representing Ireland. There was a member of the House of Lords from England, the former mayor of, I want to say Queensland. There were journalists from around the world, a couple other elected officials. So it was an interesting group. Everybody who was there, for the most part, was expected to present a paper. So I presented, and everybody else presented, and the papers were bound, not mine because I didn't deliver to them really ahead of time, but they bound them in a book, and everybody got a copy of all of the papers that were presented. And they were about how Tibet can be sustainable, how they can deal with their issues in terms of cultural assimilation, allow the Tibetan people to maintain their own identity even though they're under the auspices of the Chinese government. And they were, talking about all of those issues. For me, not knowing much at all about Tibet, going there, it was fascinating to see all of that, plus to see, of course, the dynamics between these different people coming from around the world. And there were African nations represented, South American nations, there were people from Slovenia, from Ukraine, just from everywhere, who were primarily Tibetan scholars and experts in Tibet, and then the elected officials. It was very valuable. It was, I think, interesting, like I said, for the Chinese and the Tibetans to hear what we're doing in California. I felt very honored to be able to represent Glendale and California in that respect. As you know, sustainability is a very high priority of mine, so I felt like it was, kind of, for me, a real personal honor to be able to go and talk about our efforts about sustainability and climate change and what we're doing in California, and to bring that not just to the Chinese and the Tibetans, but then to all of those other representatives from all around the world. And I had a lot of people come up to me after and talk to me and say that they thought it was an important message to talk about what sustainability looked like in the United States and in California. They hadn't really done that at the forum. Interesting, they talked a lot about sustainability in the abstract, but nobody ever got up and said, okay, here's what we should do in China. We should have this goal, and we should make sure that power plants have this level of emissions. It didn't really occur to anyone to kind of talk on that practical level. So I think when I gave my presentation, it really made people talk and really made them think. Really the next step is for China to discuss having those kinds of goals and having those very concrete kind of regulations for their power industry to follow. I think it was valuable for them. It was certainly valuable for me. It was interesting. So people don't wonder, there was no city money used. I used a portion of my own money for the trip. Some of it was paid for by the organizers of the forum. Nothing was paid for by the city of Glendale. So it was a great opportunity. Thanks for asking about it. If we had had more time, I would love to show. I've got great slides, and I'm not going to take up your time here. The last thing people want to see is that. But if anybody wants to ask me, I have them on my iPad, and I'm happy to show you photos. I took a lot of pictures of buildings because I find the development in China to be fascinating.
Perhaps you can share the presentation or make it publicly available, since it's it's on behalf of the city of Glendale, California.
Yeah, I'm happy to put some of the slides on, and one of the participants made a little movie as well, which was sort of interesting that you can see. He's friends with me on Facebook, and I can point people if they could see his film.
But specifically the presentation that you delivered as opposed to the slides, that's great.
You know what? I'm happy to give to the city the speech, the text of the speech I presented, and I don't know where the city could put it. I don't know if there's enough interest to put it on our city website, but I'm happy to make that available. If anybody wants to see it, I'm happy to email to anybody the text that I presented in China about sustainability.
And just, the question just comes to mind. Was it the issue of, how should I put this, the contentiousness of China's relationship with Tibet and the Dalai Lama basically being in exile? Did that ever come up, or was this something everyone tiptoed around?
No, it was interesting because, and I hope we're not digressing too much. If we're talking too much,
it up, so.
Mr. Garcia is making faces, but it's not a political. We're not voting on anything. So it's interesting because I heard the title of what this was about, cultural and environmental sustainability. So environmental sustainability, right down my alley. I go off to Tibet to find out what they're doing in China. And of course, they do talk about the separatist movement, the Dalai Lama. It does come up in some of the speeches. China is definitely wanting the world to know that their view that Tibet has been part of China for centuries was presented to us in a very subtle fashion. If you go to the museums in Tibet and you're thinking about this, you can see in the displays in the museums, which they have a lot of museums about Tibet, and you go and there's great museums about the culture of Tibet, and you see artifacts, but side by side to the more traditional Tibetan artifacts, they show Chinese artifacts from the area from all of those periods, going way back through many dynasties. And if you think about it, you realize that it's really their way of saying, look, China's been here for centuries, and we want you to know they've been here for centuries. This isn't new. So it's kind of a subtle form of propaganda. And for me, not knowing much about it, but knowing that much, that there's this dispute, it was really fascinating to see how China handles that bit of propaganda inside of Tibet. They also really wanted us to see that people practice their religion there freely. So they took us to the temples where you do see the Tibetans go, and they have the monks, and they go and they practice their religion. And the journalists asked me, so do you see now that we're not repressing people religiously? They're able to practice their religion. And they really wanted, it was important for them for us to come back to the United States and spread that message. I'm sure they would have loved for me to make a presentation where I said something like, everyone in Tibet is really, really happy, and they don't want the Dalai Lama to come back, and they're free. Now, I don't feel nearly knowledgeable enough to make any kind of political, you can't spend 5 days somewhere and make that kind of view, to either side. But it was interesting to go and kind of be part of seeing that dynamic play out. So not only was it discussed in the forum proper, but it was certainly discussed a lot amongst the attendees, the people from the foreign, from all of those different countries. Everyone spoke English, so kind of at dinner and at lunch, people talked about it. What do you think? Is it what you thought it was going to be? And they talked about these politics. So there was definitely that underplay throughout the whole event. It was, even though it wasn't what the forum was about, it was interesting to see it.
Of course. Have your questions been answered, Mr. Weaver?
Yeah.
Great.
Any other great suggestions, Mr. Weaver?
Oh, no, none. Let's move on.
Yes, Ms. Devine.
I'll just be very brief. I would like to nominate for appointment to the Commission on the Status of Women, Sarojini Lal. She is a graduate of Smith in Massachusetts and Goldsmiths College, the University of London, England.
You don't need to read all that.
I'm not going to. I'm just simply saying she's a freelance consultant in development and communication.
And I'll just say that I know Ms. Law, and Ms. Devine couldn't have found a better commissioner. She's thoughtful, she's articulate, she's very concerned about women in the community, and I think it'd be great.
And we'll hear the details of her impressive credentials, hopefully, when we take a vote on it.
Exactly.
Excellent. And of course, we'll see the CD. Okay, thank you.
Now, I have some slides of Tibet. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Okay, what's next on the agenda? Oh, Mr. Nigerian, you have something to add.
I will be brief. This weekend, I attended the Armenian Independence Day Festival in Verdugo Park. Armenia is a republic that is more than 23 years old. It is an entity and a nationality that has a nation that has existed for millennia. It is only they counted the 23 years from 1991 when they broke apart from the then Soviet Union. That was a wonderful festival, and I wish the very best to the Republic of Armenia to become stronger and to secure the best interests of their citizens as the years go on. My next question is regarding the synthetic turf ordinance that I asked to come forward. Are we on board with that? We're going to...
That will be coming back as soon as we get through all of the work on DSP. I mean, it'll be before the end of the calendar year.
Okay.
It will be
because
back.
As we rank lawns, pools with no cover, pools with a cover, drought-tolerant plants, I think a synthetic turf is about zero water usage. So, and unfortunately, as the meteorologists seem to prognosticate, the El Nino that we were all hoping for is sputtering out. The water temperatures which generate, the warm water temperatures which generate the El Nino condition seem to be moderating. So we may be in big trouble, and I think everything that we can do to conserve water and all these ideas that we talked about are important. So I look forward to reviewing that before our city turns into a patch of dry, brown, arid wasteland. Return to the desert that we once were. Thank you.
Desolation of smog. Okay, what's next?
Agenda item number 6, community event announcements, 3 minutes.
Thank you, and we have 2 speaking cards. Sharon Townsend, followed by Katie Kurtz. 3 minutes.
Good evening. I'm Sharon Townsend with Glendale Healthy Kids. The Board of Directors of Glendale Healthy Kids believe in addressing the current and ongoing health needs of our city's children and youth. For the past year, we have worked side by side with Senator Carol Liu's office and her staff to address an immediate and very unfortunately ongoing urgent need, and that is mental health. In conjunction with Senator Carol Liu, we will convene the first meeting of the Mental Health Coalition this Thursday. Stakeholders represent a wide berth of expertise, and they will gather to work on our business model, which is threefold: operate, evaluate, and modulate, or in layman's terms, diagnose, fix, and maintain. Rather than see a need or fix a need or repair the levees when they fail in the middle of a hurricane, we're going to work to maintain those levees of care, education, and policies. I'm extremely grateful to the Senator's office. I'm especially grateful to my own board of directors. We have 2 here tonight. And to our mayor and to our city manager, who have been extremely encouraging, helpful, and support in moving forward. I do believe with all my heart and just every bone in my body that we can and we will make a difference, and not only that, we have to make a difference. On October 14th at the City Council meeting, I'll provide a full report for you. And in order to support the works of Glendale Healthy Kids, you have a chance to support us as we roll our Guess Who's Coming to Dinner in late October, and we're going to culminate on November 8th with our 20th birthday celebration. We are 20 years old, and we will honor our fellow people that formed us, the city being one. So I hope you can join us and support us, and we just pray for our youth. It's all about our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Townsend. Katie Kurtz. Let me know if I didn't pronounce that correctly. Huh?
Pronounced it exactly right.
Oh, great.
Good evening, council members. My name is Katie Kurtz. I'm here with Walk Bike Glendale, and I'm just here to invite you to an event that we're holding this Saturday. It's a bike ride to introduce some folks throughout the county, actually, to our fair city, as well as give an opportunity of our city members to get on their bikes and explore the city on bike. So I have a few flyers here for you, and I'll pass these out once I'm done. But I wanted to just emphasize that this bike ride is actually a partnership between Walk Bike Glendale, which, as you probably know, is an all-volunteer-based chapter of the LA County Bicycle Coalition, with Cycle. Cycle is a nonprofit that's based in Pasadena, but their rides are throughout the county, and the objective is to introduce bicycle riding to non-riders and emphasizing safety and how to use the road, etc., for residents in all kinds of cities all throughout the county. So they were gracious to extend an invitation to Walk Bike Glendale to host a ride in our fair city, and so that ride is coming up on Saturday, like I said. And then also, just to emphasize that the funding for this is coming through Metro, and that there will be some Metro officials that will be joining us on the bike ride as well. We'll be starting the ride at Tropico Station at the Glendale Metro Link to highlight the historic landmark that is that station. We'll be going to Porto's, Alex Theater, and then, well, it's not technically Glendale, we're going to end at Golden Road for a few beers. So if you have a bicycle and haven't gotten on it in a while, this is a really great opportunity to come out, meet your neighbors, meet some other folks, meet the fun Walk Bike Glendale steering committee members, and explore city by bike. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
What time does it start? What time do we gather?
Sure. It's this weekend at 9:30.
At the Tropico train.
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, Ms. Kurtz. What's next?
Agenda item number 7, adoption of ordinances. 7A, amendments to Title 30 of the GMC 1995 relating to miscellaneous revisions and minor cleanups. This was introduced on September 9th, 2014 by Councilmember Friedman.
Who'd like to?
I'll move the item.
Second.
May we have roll call, please?
Councilmember Devine,
Yes.
Friedman,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Mayor Sinanian.
Yes. Thank you. Next item?
Under action items, 8A, City Manager regarding consideration of support for Assembly Bill 1014, Skinner, gun violence, restraining orders. 8A1, resolution supporting AB 1014.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Ochoa?
This was something that was brought up previously by Council Member Friedman in the wake of the Isla Vista tragedy in Santa Barbara. Assemblymember Skinner had introduced legislation that is now pending approval at the governor's office that would put in place restraining orders on individuals deemed to be mentally unstable. Our legislative analyst, Christine Powers, can answer any specific questions regarding the definitions and conditions under which the restraining orders would be placed if council so requests.
I believe I've signed a letter in support of this assembly bill, but go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say that we also received correspondence from Cabbage Coalition for a Better
And yeah.
Glendale.
Yes.
There's two Cabbages now. I don't know if they have the same name. They have the same acronym. This is the one that was involved in the gun show, not the one that's suing the city or involved in that lawsuit. Just to be clear, and they were supporting us passing a resolution in support of this legislation.
That's excellent.
Well, I have
do we
some
have any
questions.
Yeah,
I do.
go ahead,
So
Mr.
can
Najarian?
you, I'm familiar with a domestic violence restraining order. And that's oftentimes issued by a cohabitant or former cohabitant, requested and petitioned for, based on threats and tangible actions which would lead a judge to predict violence. So what does this do when you say gun violence restraining order? I don't.
Sure. Councilmember Najarian, members of the council, this is very similar, like you said, to a restraining order that one would get. It is defined in the bill as to, who a family member, a spouse, who can make the request, and it goes through a court order. The whole thing does go through a court process, very similar to a restraining order. So they have to consider things like, have guns been purchased recently, past behavior, current mental state, and professionals can come in and provide opinions, and family members can as well.
I guess I'm concerned about some of the emotions that rage in disputes, in breakups, in divorces. And for example, if I was a gun owner, would someone be able to go to a judge and say, I think Najarian is violent, and would that permit the police to enter my home and take away any firearms that I own?
Councilmember Najarian, only if the judge deems it to be a legitimate claim, and furthermore, if it is for the abuse of the process, it is a criminal penalty. So if someone is abusing the system, it's deemed a misdemeanor.
Okay, and this was I guess initiated, the genesis was the Isla Vista shootings. And so how would this have prevented the Isla Vista shootings? In fact, didn't he kill 4 of his roommates with a knife or something at the beginning? Does this extend to knives also, other weapons, or just guns?
I believe...
I haven't read, and I'm asking this because I haven't read, we don't have the body of the bill here, and these are just questions that I'm popping in my head.
It does limit it to guns, and I believe in the Isla Vista situation, the family had tried to reach out to police. The perpetrator had legally obtained guns in recent months, and when police did a welfare check, they had no basis, there's no laws that allowed them to seize the guns, so potentially court could have looked at additional information. I think there were YouTube videos and probably past history that we're not aware of that may have possibly prevented this.
The threshold for, my understanding is that the threshold for the removal of the guns is something that is even less than a involuntary hold for a 5150. So while they wouldn't necessarily take the individual into custody, they could still remove the guns pursuant to a court action.
Okay, so let's say that there's this petition which is granted by a judge. Next thing I know that there's police officers knocking on the door searching my house. And let's just say that I have other contraband in the house. Let's say I've got a couple pot plants growing. And that's legally, they were legally permitted to enter. It's in plain view once they enter. Now I'm prosecuted for, and I have no guns. And I'm a peaceful guy, but someone that's angry at me made this, despite the fact that there's a penalty for false claims, and that there's many, there's a penalty for making a false police report, but that doesn't mean false police reports never get made. Now I'm under prosecution for these other things, which the police saw when they, and if I didn't open the door, clearly they're entitled to break down the door, correct? Under a search warrant? Yes, they are. So I have a problem with this. I mean, I think the idea of reducing gun violence is great, but I don't think this bill is well thought out, and, I think there are some rights involved. So you guys, I don't want to...
But you don't have a right to grow pot in your house. I mean, you're breaking the law. If they have probable cause to come in and they find out that you've been breaking the law, that's your problem.
Because someone said I'm a violent guy?
It's irrelevant. They walked in with probable cause. You shouldn't be breaking the law.
It's a constitutional issue.
I have a question.
Yes, Ms. Devine.
What kind of, there has to be some sort of proof that this person is a danger to himself and others that they present to the judge. Is there anything written in the bill on who has to provide that information? I mean, it must have to come from a reliable, I would think, a doctor or...
Well, it says in the bill language that doctors can make the referral, law enforcement, and family members, and it defines family members. And in the bill it says that the courts must consider certain facts, such as past violent behaviors. They can go and obtain records as to gun sales, so things like that. But as far as hard, concrete proof, doesn't quite spell it out, but those are the types of things that do guide the courts to make the decisions to issue the order.
So police wouldn't even be authorized under this bill to even start the process, right? If a neighbor referred it, for example, it has to be a family member, a doctor, and a law enforcement individual.
Yes.
There you go. That answers part of the question.
And also, this is a mental health issue. I mean, we're going back to the mental health issue and aspect of this, and it seems that in that circumstance, it's not actually, and I hate to say gun control, but it's trying to head off an incident caused by a mental health issue. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. So it goes along with guns don't kill people, people do, and so I would approve. I would go along with that.
Ms. Friedman?
Yeah, this isn't about depriving law-abiding people the right to have guns. We've seen massacres in this country committed by people who have no business owning guns. And in any sane society, they wouldn't be allowed to own a gun because they're clearly not responsible. There are people we don't allow to drive. There are people we don't allow to vote. There are people that we don't allow to do certain things. And in this case, we're talking about a very high standard that has to be met. It has to be a close family member, a doctor, law enforcement, and then a judge has to look at this and say, no, there's not enough proof here. This person has the right to have this firearm. Or, you know what, this person has an immediate, there's an immediate issue where this person could be a danger. And I'm assuming that it's not forever, that there's a process of reevaluation and all of that. But in Isla Vista, unfortunately, from what I understand, the parents of the perpetrator knew that this person was a danger, had approached law enforcement, and they knew that this man had guns, and they weren't able to take them away. And yes, he could have still used knives, and there still could have been a tragedy, but it wouldn't. He killed people with a gun. He was randomly driving around and shooting people randomly on the street. That part of it would have been avoided. And to me, this is just common sense. And as I mentioned when I introduced this, the man who introduced this, who's the father of a young man who was killed by that shooter, is a Vietnam veteran, very much a moderate when it comes to gun rights, supports the right of people to carry guns. He himself has been a gun owner. He's, definitely not somebody who's an extremist who's using this as a way to, get lots of guns off the street. He really believes that this is a way to keep guns out of the hands of people who are mentally unstable, and I think that's very reasonable. So I hope that there's support here for this resolution. The governor hasn't signed this yet. I don't know whether he will, and certainly what we do is purely symbolic. It does show, I think it's important, though, for us to show the support. I think that our law enforcement would probably appreciate having this tool, and I see our police chief nodding, that if they really felt that someone was in imminent danger, of having some tool of being able to go to a judge and make their case, just make their case, and be able to act on that to protect public safety. So as far as I understand, law enforcement is in favor of this bill as well. And So I would like to introduce this. I'd like to move that we pass this resolution.
Second.
And we have our police chief present in the audience. If I can ask whether the statement that, which I believe to be true, that law enforcement supports this bill is the case.
Yes, the LA County Police Chiefs Association as well as the California Police Chiefs Association have reviewed this bill, and we stand in support of it. It is another tool that we would have available to us under certain circumstances. It is, just like a domestic violence restraining order requires a judicial review. Within 14 days of the issuance, a hearing must be held in order to determine whether the order will stand. In terms of knocking down doors and things of that nature, it says we must try to serve the person in a reasonable manner, but currently under domestic violence restraining orders, we don't knock down a door and do searches. The person is required to surrender the weapons. If family members say there's weapons in the bedroom, then we do have the probable cause to enter that location to obtain the weapons, but we don't do forcible entries, or we don't do search warrant type searches when we're enforcing or serving a restraining order, and this order would fall under that same type of protocol.
Yes, thank you, Chief Castro. I think. Yes,
well, let me
Mr.
ask the
Najarian.
chief. It says here a bill would allow a search warrant to be issued to seize firearms.
That would be separate. So they can order a search warrant also.
But that's in this bill.
But that would be separate. So the restraining order is one thing, but then if law enforcement says we need a search warrant to enter the premises in order to, because a family member says they have an arsenal locked in a safe in an area, we'd have to show probable cause to the judge that a search warrant would be issued in conjunction with the restraining order. So it's kind of a two-piece area. Now, that would be the same thing as if we obtained a domestic violence restraining order to keep two parties apart, but we wanted a Ramey warrant to make an arrest or to enter a property to do a search to find evidence of domestic violence or another felony. That requires the search warrant component of it.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Chief. We're ready to vote. May we have roll call, please?
Council members Devine,
Yes.
Friedman,
Yes.
Najarian,
No.
Weaver,
Aye.
Mayor Sinanian.
Yes. Thank you. Next item, please.
Item 8B, City Manager and the City Attorney regarding City Council districts. 8B1, motion directing staff to solicit input from community stakeholder groups.
Mr. Garcia?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. The purpose of this item is to really announce that we'll be conducting some outreach and seeking council support of that on the issue of council districts. As you know, because you've all been elected at large, the city under our charter has an at-large election requirement, meaning that council members must be elected at large through the city. This at-large requirement also applies to Glendale Unified School District and GCC. The college and the school have recently moved to look into going to district elections or trustee area elections, as that term is used for those entities. And I would say that, as you know, GCC has probably taken a much more affirmative step in that regard, has adopted a resolution to request the state authorities to allow them to go to districts and to implement that by April of 2017. The school district board has had a discussion on this item as well, and we anticipate that they'll be coming back for a future discussion in the next month or so. And if they do, what they will be asking is they will be asking the city council to place a charter amendment on the ballot to remove the language in the city charter that requires Glendale Unified School District elections to be at large, and that would allow them in turn to change their districts to district elections. Now, what is driving a significant portion of this, as has been reported, is that there is a statute, the California Voting Rights Act, that has spawned a significant amount of litigation challenging at-large districts on the grounds that the CVRA prohibits at-large districts that impair the ability of protected classes to elect candidates of their choice. And while I would say that Glendale has certainly had diverse city councils, and I don't believe that Glendale elections meet the test for liability under CVRA, I think a prudent actor in the situation would look at this and study the issue. And so that's what we're doing. We're studying the issue to see whether or not we might have potential liability. But in that regard, we also feel it's appropriate to at least initially outreach to our community stakeholder groups, Glendale Homeowners Coordinating Council, Chamber of Commerce, other homeowners association groups, other interested groups, to apprise them of the issue, kind of present the issues that are presented by CVRA, and then solicit their input, and then report back to the City Council on that as we report back on the other issues that might relate to CVRA and City Council districts. So again, the initial discussion point is we want to just start this process off, announce what we're doing, get council feedback and direction to start the process to outreach to these community groups. And again, with respect to the City of Glendale and the City Council, it would require a charter amendment if the council desired to move forward to change the process by which council members are elected from at-large to some other system, including districts. So with that, I would submit to questions, but the action that we are requesting is that you direct City Manager and I to outreach, meet with these groups, present the item to them, and solicit their feedback, and then report back to you.
Again, I know you stated it very clearly. I want to state it again. There's absolutely no evidence of there being polarized voting or some kind of a discriminatory impact of elections in the city of Glendale. We're doing this because this thing is happening. You know, we're one of the entities that received a letter. Nothing that's happening in Glendale at this, at least on the city council level, even comes close to satisfying the violation of CVRE. And we're doing this because we want our residents to be aware of this, and maybe this is something our residents are interested in, right?
That's correct. And I would say we've many times before, previous councils and previous community members have looked at the issue of going to districts. Most recently, when we did the charter amendments back in 2005, the issue was discussed by the Charter Review Committee, but the consensus was the preference for our at-large system, but that was not against the backdrop of the California Voting Rights Act. So we think it's appropriate now to reach out again to community members, to community organizations, seek their input, and then bring that information back to you.
Very well. Mr. Weaver?
I want to say the public got to understand this is a law firm, goes across the state of California, suing cities and school districts and college districts, threatening lawsuits if they don't implement districts, and they try to settle out of court for millions of dollars, all by one law firm. A few years ago, we had the same thing with ADA compliance. A law firm came around to cities, including this one, and would measure the slope of the ADA ramps to make sure they were right. If not, lawsuit, and then settle out of court. So I wish the state legislature would react to these law firms that make a living going around and suing cities, school districts, whatever, to fatten their own pockets. It's putting us through a heck of a lot of work and cost, because we're going to have to pay to defend if we go in. Okay. It's too bad.
Yes, Mr. Majorian.
I do support this. I think reaching out to the members of the community for their thoughts on this issue is very good. But while you're out there getting their thoughts, let's be a little bit more broad in the topics that we raise. Let's discuss with them cumulative voting. Let's discuss with them whether they feel that we should have an elected mayor with a 4-year term. These are all subject to charter amendments as well. Let's discuss whether we would like to do a mail-in ballot. Let's discuss whether we'd like to have a primary system.
What term limits, Mr. Majorian?
Term limits as well. I mean, let's include, while we're discussing these, in fact, it might be difficult to separate them all, but let's hear what the people have to say. So primaries, mail-in ballots, elected mayor, cumulative voting, I think these all go hand in hand with some of the issues involving districts. So,
and there are certainly some of the cities or jurisdictions that have had to address this issue have looked at many of these different issues as remedies or potential settlement deal points. So certainly part of the discussion for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a speaker on this item, Mike Mohill. Mr. Mohill, how much time would you need? 3 minutes, okay? Okay, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor Sinanian, council members. My name is Mike Mohill. As a longtime advocate for council districts, I am very, very happy this item is being addressed by this city council and the members of the community. Just for the people in the viewing audience, every one of our council members here today all live above the 134 freeway. There is no representation south of the 134 freeway. Now, the Voting Rights Act is about ethnic voting, voting ethnically. That's how it came out in the first place. But I've always felt that that was wrong, like a lot of people say. I think the issue is council district based on social and economic interest. The people in North Glendale do not have the same viewpoints of the people who live in South Glendale and West Glendale. Economically, socially, they're all different. But unfortunately, now we're going to have to do this whole thing based on black people, brown people, Asian people. It shouldn't be that way. I'm sorry to see that, because we're all in it together. But we're in it together not ethnically, but socially and business-wise. And having a mayor that represents all the people would be great. 5 separate council districts would be great. There are many ways we can skin this cat. I only have 3 minutes to talk about it tonight. I've talked about it ever since I ran for city council. But I'm glad this man, who has deep pockets and a lawsuit and a legal background, to sue not only the city of Glendale, but Pasadena, and all over up and down the state of California, to force see, ladies and gentlemen in the audience, the establishment does not want council districts. That's the bottom line. They're comfortable with it. That's how they all got elected. Whenever I've talked with anybody about council district, they'll say, oh, I'm all for it. But once they were on city council, guess what, folks? They were against council districts. Look up in Montrose, the mayor of Montrose, Mr. Draymond. He was for council districts till he became a council person, and then he never wanted to talk about it again. I even addressed him about that issue. So, ladies and gentlemen, the viewing audience, please think about this, council districts. You want to have more voter participation? Council district is the way to go. People say, oh, we only had 10%, 20, 15% people vote. Well, if we had council district, I'm sure people would be getting more involved because it would represent them. Because Mrs. Devine and Mr. Weaver, you say we have 5 council members? Yes, but you don't represent me. I live in Shoal Canyon right now, and the landfill is a big issue. Which one of you 5 councilmen will represent me? Mr. Weaver, I know, lives up there, but I never see him speak before the group of the Homeowners Association. Ladies and gentlemen, this is finally our opportunity to bring up council districts and all the different issues. Remember, the establishment does not want change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moyle.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Yeah, I lived 2 blocks away from him, and I was president of the Glendale Canyon Homeowners Association for many years, and I was living there before the landfill was even started. I still live there, and I don't have cancer. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do also respectfully disagree with the statement that there's no one on this council that represents people south of 134. I would like to think of myself as someone who does, and my colleagues are free to feel the same way.
We all do.
But that's it, unless anyone has anything else to add, and we have a motion. Yes,
I would
Ms.
just like
Devine?
to say that that's the reason that we're going out and asking the public and scheduling these meetings so that we find out exactly what the community thinks about districting. And I think that is a good thing, and we're doing the right thing. So we'll find out.
Yes. Thank you. So do we have a motion?
I guess we have to do it, don't we? Now, the attorney says we have to, so I'll move 8B1. I don't like it, but I'll do it.
In a second, I'm just going to make one comment just so the public's clear. And Mr. Mohill brings up a good point that there's districting to sort of have area representation, but that's not what this lawsuit's about, and let's be clear. To satisfy this lawsuit, it would have to be to satisfy what they believe to be ethnic block voting. So you'd have to create your districts with an eye towards that, not just saying, well, we want the North to have its area and this area to have their representation. That doesn't satisfy the lawsuit. So these issues are going to be spelled out more clearly in the meetings, but I want everyone who's listening to this, who's starting to think about this issue, to recognize that this is a voting rights lawsuit based on ethnic grounds, not on geographic grounds. So that's the way this will have to be addressed if we're to address the lawsuit.
Thank you. So let's have
Councilmember Devine?
Yes.
Councilmember Friedman?
Yes.
Najarian?
Yes.
Weaver?
Aye.
Mayor Sinanian?
Yes. Thank you. Next item, please.
Under hearings, 9A, Director of Community Development, continued from September 9th, 2014, regarding amendments to Title 30 of the GMC 1995 relating to the precise plan of design overlay zone. 9A1, resolution adopting a negative declaration. 9A2, ordinance for introduction.
Thank you.
I'll start it off and hand it over to Mr. Agani. This is an item that we came to City Council asking for your direction to initiate a code amendment, and we had brought it forward, and unfortunately through just a mix-up on our end, we had to hold it over 1 week, which is great, and we have a full council. The broad strokes of this, and certainly Mr. Agani can get into detail with respect to precise plan design overlay zone, is to give the City Council, in your efforts to do placemaking, to actually create and design and allow for thoughtful development of neighborhoods and blocks of various size, not just larger districts like downtown, but maybe on a neighborhood basis or on a large parcel basis. The ability to have some latitude within our zoning code that allows you to look at all of the amenities, look at what the community's interests are, and make those best judgments as you see them, understanding that all of these precise planning overlay zones, should you approve this, would come back to this council for your approval specifically. With that, I'll ask Mr. Agani to give a general overview of the thought process behind this tool.
Thank you. Mr. Hagani?
Yes, thank you, Mr. City Manager and Mr. Mayor. Basically, this is a chapter that has existed in our zoning code since 1976. It was first created in the way it has been written 40 years ago or so, was to, it is written specifically about design, and that was way prior to when we started having design review processes and the design review guidelines and having design-based codes like we do today. As we are getting to the point where most of our development areas are maxed out, we think that this tool is going to become more and more something that the developers are opting for, and we decided to take a look at this chapter. We discovered that the language is outdated and does not reflect the 40 years of development of thought process that has been reflected in the zoning code. Specifically, the way that it works right now, you would go through a zone change for a site or a number of sites, and you would only freeze the design in place and would not give you the flexibility to add additional language and additional flexibility to the code for that site to make it much more compatible for the area. What we're proposing is changes that would allow the City Council to consider variations from the underlying code where this overlay district would be introduced, and within those flexibilities that would be both in terms of some standards that the City Council could consider, certain height or restrictions or additional restrictions or additional flexibilities, for example, in the massing and height, and then also some flexibility in the types of uses that you would like to consider for that site. We think this flexibility will make this tool a lot more useful as we get developers coming in to look at the remaining sites throughout the city. They will come with a slew of variances. That is certainly still going to be available to them. However, this will allow legislatively the City Council to review the site as a whole and come up with a mini, what I would consider a mini specific plan light for that area that identifies the structure and the restrictions And within that, we're asking that you give the community development director some flexibility to follow up after you adopt a specific site plan for a PPD zone. If the developer needs to make certain changes, for example, up to 20% of the numeric code numbers that you will put in the precise plan of development that may be considered by the community development director, and also changes such as change of use, so that each time a developer finds that they need to make some changes, you do not have to come through a 4 out of 5 vote and go to the Planning Commission through another zoning code amendment. This is similar to what we have done for the Americana brand, that you have allowed certain flexibilities that allow us to work with the developer as the site needs to change tenants, for example, or they need to make a change of use. We can consider those, and if they are within the limits allowed by the council, we can consider them at the staff level. So in a nutshell, that is what's in the code amendment before you. If you'd like to ask more precise questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Hani. Mr. Najarian?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a briefing by Tim Foy about a month ago on this, and one of the questions I had is, why isn't this illegal spot zoning?
I'm going to refer that to Mr. City Attorney.
It sounds like it's spot zoning. You're giving a special zone in use to the exclusion of all the surrounding properties?
Right. This type of zoning is certainly not unique within California. Many jurisdictions use it. What spot zoning is obviously treating similar properties differently, but without a rational basis for doing so. And the courts have very recently, have continued to clarify that this type of zoning or zoning that may treat one property different than another is proper if there's a rational basis for doing so. I think the cases are pretty clear. The law is pretty clear that this type of zoning is lawful. We have standards in place for approving this type of zoning. It's not a standardless form of zoning that willy-nilly we can just start dishing out to any applicant that walks through the door. It has to be quality design. There has to be specific circumstances that justify the granting of this particular zoning classification. So just to reiterate, spot zoning isn't per se illegal. What's illegal is spot zoning that doesn't have a rational basis for doing so. And these types of, whether they're called PPDs or plan developments, are permissible under the law as long as they have criteria for approving them, such as we have here.
So looking at paragraph E, it says the purpose of this is to provide the city and applicant with reciprocal latitude to consider alternate standards in return for increased amenities to serve the inhabitants of the development and surrounding areas.
Correct.
So that would be one of the criteria. And then another criteria is to provide a method for the development of properties having unique design features. So this is geography and topography and perhaps size
of the property.
Yeah.
Correct. Talking about. I don't want to get in trouble now.
Not at all, and I think just in the more practical application, we're in a built-out environment, as Mr. Agani had indicated. There will crop up a handful of larger size, kind of tweener sites. They're not big enough to do a full subdivision, but they're big. They are big enough to invite substantial development. If you were to go by the code and go by the parochial zoning requirements that we have today and try to apply them to those types of very unique properties, and they have some kind of characteristic, maybe they're across the street from a park, maybe they are adjacent to some other kind of public amenity. Well, if you were to go by the code, then we would be shackled to exactly what that code requires, or allow, if there was for the higher and better use of that property as that's determined by the city council, that would require the city to move forward or the developer to move forward with any number of variances that I don't think speak to holistically what we're trying to build on one of these projects. So this kind of is, as I think Mr. Agani characterized it properly, is a mini specific plan. Let's say you're across the street from a park, you have a 2.5 acre site, and the code requires you to put public space, open space inside of that, what would be a proposed subdivision. Well, instead of doing that, why not require that developer to expand the existing park? and make that a larger amenity for the larger community in exchange for what would otherwise be a variance in that submittal, in that proposal. You have the ability to do that kind of placemaking on, as Mr. Garcia has stated, on a point-by-point basis under the law, fully lawful, but in a way that makes the most sense to the neighbors so that you don't repeat the mistakes of the past, and just allowing folks to take the code at its face and either try to ramrod variances through, but rather you are able to require that next developer, that next investor, to invest in the amenities for the betterment of the neighborhood.
Okay, couple questions. Is this related to the small lot development?
No, it's not.
Okay.
It's not related to the small lot subdivision at all.
Next question is, could a developer use this to increase density on a project?
Well, that may be possible, and again, but that would need to come with a rationale for the increased density, and then the council would have the opportunity to ask for something in return for the increased density, which you couldn't necessarily do through a variance process.
I would go back to the example about the open space in the park. Right. Let's say you were going to do this, hypothetical 2.5 acre, 3 acre site, and in a very common type of scenario, it would be like a donut. There's units that ring it, common area in the middle, and there's a park, an existing public park that we could expand and improve right across the street. Well, if we were to say, if the council were to approve based on a recommendation, don't just do that little throwaway donut hole in the middle, invest in the park. My guess is that developer may come back and say, well, then can I put a unit in that donut hole? Well, maybe you could, but the city is in a position then at that point to extract something from the developer.
We would still be able to
also,
say no.
Well, not only can you say
on.
no, if I may add, you still
hold.
need to be consistent with the general plan.
Okay. Let me give you another example that we're all familiar with. The Exchange is having difficulties. It's needs some life, needs some vibrancy, needs that 18-hour day that we're all talking about. Could a developer request a PPD for a commercial structure there to put in 40 units that would serve the benefit of invigorating an otherwise quiet area, underutilized area of our downtown? There's your example. I mean, the goal is to invigorate. He wants a change to put residential instead of the commercial.
I would submit that for that particular example, a developer could come under the downtown specific plan currently and make the same request, and we could address that through that. We would definitely recommend that this is not a good tool for that particular site for that particular purpose.
Last question, I'll let some other people talk. These will be taken on a case-by-case basis,
Absolutely.
And you're going to need 4 votes of the council in every instance.
Yes, and they will all need to go to the Planning Commission for the recommendation by the Planning Commission, and the director will have the authority to request and require input from other commissioners, for example, DRB or HPC.
Okay.
That answers my question.
Yes, I think this is a useful tool. Once again, it gives us the flexibility to deal with problems with a soft brush as opposed to a hammer, and I'll support it. But we have a speaker on this.
Open the hearing.
I'd like to open the public hearing. Aram Kazazian. How much time do you need, Mr. Kazazian?
20 minutes.
No, I'm sorry, you can't have 20 minutes. I'll give you 5 minutes. Also have a question before.
No way I can cover everything in 5 minutes. It is entitled to the entire city.
Let me ask you a question. This memo was just passed out to us.
Correct.
Yeah. Did you just bring it with you?
Yes. You also
Sir, it's kind of unreasonable to expect us to.
I also emailed it to you. I emailed it to you 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
Yes, and I emailed to everybody 2 weeks ago.
It's all good.
Sorry, I did that.
20 minutes.
You have it handy right now.
Okay, you have 10 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you.
He's the
First
only
of all,
one.
the question I'm going to have is, what is the size of the lot? Small size. What is the small size of the lot we're talking about? What's the small size you want to apply to it? I need to clarify that, please. Is it 20,000, 30,000 square feet lot, or what is it? That's a break. I need to know. Now, I headlined this as alternative motive exists because I know why it is being done. That's why. First, let me ask the public why this code amendment was not put in onto the Planning Commission website or given this to any homeowners coordinating councils, this Chamber of Commerce, or any other property owners that be affected by this. There was no advertising. It was only put in newspress where the newspress not even exist in the rack, so that's a problem. The PBD zone, overlay zone, to me is a classic example of conditional zoning, which the city attorney talked about. That's like a spot zoning. I vaguely remember a long time ago there was something in California questioned legality of the conditional zoning. I know it doesn't apply to charter cities, but it also has under the charter. This violates the charter. If you go back and read the part of on the charter, it does violate the charter. I don't like the existing PBD zone regulations because they are too restrictive and clumsy, which is correct. But the proposed PBD zone regulations are much worse because they're too loose. I recommend that you eliminate the PBD zone from the code entirely. Now, Section 65.852 of the California Governmental Code states, all such regulations shall be uniform for each class of kind of building or use of land throughout each zone, but the regulations in one type of zone may differ from those or other types of zones. This section does not apply to charter cities, but I know that, but it makes sense to apply it to the entire California. The Charter of Glendale of Article 3, Section 2, Subdivision 19 and 20 does have some related language in it. Regulations of the buildings and lot area to regulate and limit the height of bulk buildings hereafter erected and regulate and determine the area of the yard, courts, and other open spaces for said purposes to divide the city into districts. Such regulations shall be uniform for each class of building throughout any district, but the regulations in one district may differ from those in other districts. This says that in one block you should have it. You cannot put one school and then put a commercial building right next to it, or a liquor store the other side of it. You can put an apartment the other side of it. That's what's going to happen. We're intruding into residential property with this, which is a very, very dangerous thing we're doing. 20, regulations of local trades, industries, etc., to regulate any and restrict the location of the trades and individuals and the location of the buildings designed for specific uses, and set purposes to divide the city into districts and specify for each such district the trades, trades and industries which shall be excluded or subjected to special regulations and the use of which the building may not be erected or altered. Such regulations shall be designated or promote the public health, safety, and welfare, and shall be made reasonable consideration among other things. The charter of the district and its particular suitability for particular uses. It sounds then like the proposed variable standards, conditions, zoning, and contrary to the charter of City of Glendale. The existing PBD zone has been of limited successfulness. It was originally created many years ago after the City Council had a surprise on a zone change that the building did not match the plans after it was built. I'm going to try to cut it down less for you. Good. Now, the staff report compared the proposed PPD zone standards or lack thereof to the current PRD zone. They are not exactly the same. The PRD zone does have specific standards, but with the intent of primarily allowing multifamily dwelling developments in the hills in order to accommodate more sensitive development, typically mass-graded conventional single-family development of the past. After 40 years, only 2 PRD projects have ever been built. One is the Chevy Oaks Circle development, and the other one is Rancho San Rafael Polygon development. Also, if the changes to the PPD zone are adopted, someone could just ignore the PRD zone and go to the less restrictive zones. This could even be on a Mountain Oaks property. This could go ahead, have some kind of a development apartments or multi-unit apartments into the Mountain Oaks property. The City Council has this decades of general plans, specific plans, neighborhood plans, zone changes, and of course, thousands of variances. Do we really need a zoning designation as loose as the proposed PPD zone at this time? I think this should be eliminated completely. Aside keeping track of the project, over time becomes increasingly difficult for staff to even determine which zoning they should be allowed. How often will the PPD zone actually be used in the coming years? So why will So who will apply for the PPD zone? It will be probably a developer of a substantial project that connected and doesn't want to deal with those pesky variance findings. What will the developer give up? Nothing. What was the origin of the proposed changes? Give the timing, the staff level, and other ongoing project, it seems unlikely that the planning staff would propose something complicated as this. So where did this idea really come from? Perhaps for someone already has a project in mind and is afraid and does not want to have the public know about this project. Okay? So please do not vote for this. There's a lot of issues. I think it should be sent back to staff to study it and do some changes with the community before we go any further on this. And the negative declarations, I have not done much study on it, but it should not be voted on because this is a substantial impact on the neighborhood. So please understand what's going on before we vote and answer me that question of what happens to what size we're talking about of properties. And you don't want to get the city stuck into any future lawsuits coming up because something we didn't do right here. And I hate to do so. Thank you much.
Thank you, Mr. Kazazian. I'm going to close the public hearing, but if there's anything that you'd like to add. I did. I'm sorry. I apologize. I'll open the public hearing. Bill Nickel. Okay.
All right.
5 minutes.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council, staff. My name is Bill Nickel. I'm a director and a secretary of the Chevy Chase Estates Homeowners Association. And I'm here to talk about the PPD this evening. The CCA Board of Directors believes that the proposed revisions to the PPD introduce unnecessary complexity to an ordinance that has only seen minimal use over the years. It also appears to add a degree of flexibility that could be misused to develop projects of questionable benefit to the community. We therefore question how the adoption of the proposed PPD revisions will be a worthwhile change to the city codes. We're puzzled by the changes, and we don't understand the rush to make them. That's not the only reason I'm here this evening. We thought it important to bring to your attention that there is a lot of support throughout the Chevy Chase community for the changes in the country club, contrary to the buzz heard in some areas. Regardless of the upgrades, I heard no negative comments from the community
I'm
as
sorry,
a
I
whole.
have to interrupt you, Mr. Nickel. This is not
Beg
proper
pardon?
for this item.
I'm coming to it. I'll connect it.
You're starting really far. So, okay. Well, let's see.
I have
if
an
you
idea
can
where it's
connect.
going.
I can rearrange it if you like, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, let's hear it. Let's see what the connection is.
There have been no negative comments from the community as a whole and from various elements of the community. As a matter of fact, our president, at the unanimous behest of the board, is actively working with management of the club to expedite the improvements to be made. And I bring this up because we do not want discussions regarding the PPD to affect the progress being made in the Community Development Department on this project. We believe the existing PPD as applicable to this project will readily accommodate the changes and additions planned for the club, as will the revised code were it to be adopted. There should be no cause for delay of the project that the planning has worked so diligently to move forward, and we appreciate that diligence. We ask Council to assure us that the project will not be delayed because of these discussions of the precise plan, design, overlay, zoning ordinance. And we, most of all of the 1,557 households in the Chevy Chase Canyon, appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nickel. And again, I apologize for missing the card. Okay, we're going to close the public hearing now. And Mr. Garcia.
I think we probably will both have responses. Let me just address the legal issues that were raised in the presentation by Mr. Kazazian. It is true that there's this provision of the government code which says that regulations shall be uniform by district. And as he pointed out, that particular provision does not apply to charter cities. And we do have language in our charter that has similar, although not identical language. Our view has always been, or at least my view has always been, that that rule generally applies to the concept that, generally speaking, our zoning regulations shall treat, if you're in this C3 commercial zone, we don't even have that, but as an example, those commercial properties should generally be treated the same. They should have the same regulations apply across the board. However, and I believe, and I tried to find, I believe there's even cases looking at this particular point. As I noted before, there are many jurisdictions that have this form of zoning in one form or another, whether it's called a plan development, a PUD, or this precise plan of development. And my view is that having this particular mechanism or this particular tool, zoning tool, does not violate the general rule that similar properties in the same zone shall be treated differently, because again, it's not. There are standards in place for approval of this particular zone. Generally speaking, the zoning has to be consistent. The use has to be consistent. There are exceptions that can be granted by council only after finding. So, between now and next week, I will find the case authorities to point to you. But this is something that I've dealt with in the past, and that our office has looked at, and we feel comfortable that this complies with both state law and our city charter.
Yes, Ms. Freeman.
Well, I want to thank the public for coming forward. I'm glad to hear that the residents of Chevy Chase are supportive of what's happening at the country club. Terrific. It's a great amenity, and it'll be even a better amenity in the future. So that's good to hear. I'm supportive of this, and anything that we can do, we can always undo. But in my mind, flexibility is not a bad thing. It can be bad, but we have checks and balances in place here because you have to have 4 members of the council agreeing to make these changes. Plus, it's going to go in front of the Planning Commission, probably DRB, depending on what it is. So you already have 1, perhaps 2 or more layers of review before it even comes to council. So there'll be a lot of public input if it's a project that's at all controversial. And then when you come in front of council, you have to have 4 votes. So it's not like something that's just administratively approved or even requires just a majority vote. So there's a lot of that in and of itself gives you a lot of checks and balances. But what it allows is it allows flexibility that can do a lot of good at times. And I just know from being 5 years on the design review board that sometimes you'll codify something where you have a goal of having a certain type of design, but then your code itself will prevent what you're trying to achieve. Whether it's something like your code is to try to make projects blend into a hillside, let's say. But sometimes by the way the code is written, you actually prevent a design that might have done a better job at blending things in, but it's just not allowed because of certain requirements. It's not a very clear example, but it's something that I saw happen over and over again. or you'll require a certain type of open space, and because of where you have to put it, it ends up being not very usable, whereas if there had been more flexibility and someone could have put it somewhere else on the project, you get much better use of open space. So I saw time after, many times in my years at DRB where what the code was trying to create was actually curtailed by the wording of a code. So I think building in some flexibility, having a process by which we can evaluate that, if somebody's being creative and they come forward with a design, let's say, or a plan that gives you more of what you already want in your district. And Mr. Ochoa used the example of a park where you can, glom some land onto a park and create a more, open space for everybody that maybe the code wouldn't otherwise allow. It's a good example. So you end up with a project that's really better for the community and, better than maybe design-wise what you would have had otherwise. I think that we'll have to see how this plays out. I don't think that this is something that's going to be used very often. I think it's going to be used pretty infrequently and only in sites that are unusual sites. And we do have sites in the city, and we've seen them before, that back up to railroad tracks or back up to a park, or they're long and narrow. And what you get when people follow the code is really something awkward and ugly, that no one wants to approve. And if this gives architects, or designers or planners a better way to do something, then we should look at it. And we can always say no. And the public can always say we don't like it. But having flexibility in terms of design can open up solutions that otherwise you wouldn't have access to. So I support this. We should give it a try, see what happens. Maybe we'll not have anything come in for a year. Maybe we'll have something next month, and we can see how it works, and we can always, decide to change it. And by the way, in terms of it being spot zoning, it seems to me that since every property has the same ability to come in and apply for this, you're not right that are in these areas, you're not only saying, well, only this property can apply or that property. You already have a certain kind of equality because anyone could ask for this. They're not going to get it, but you're not restricting people's ability to ask. So in that respect, you are treating all the properties equally.
Mr. Mayor, could we hear Mr. Ghani? He wanted to respond before.
Well, there were a couple of comments that were said that I would like to address, if I may. In the comment, the previous speaker spoke about various districts that need to be, per California state law, we need to create those. We have those. We actually have the general plan, and the general plan divides the city into different types of areas and with different with an overall policy for each. And every one of these PPD applications will have to comply with that. We're not ever changing the underlying policy you have set in the general plan. So that will respond to that particular piece of it. With regard to the minimum size, there is no minimum size. I can tell you that this is not a cheap undertaking. An applicant who wants to apply for these will probably have to start with a $25,000 check just to get the whole process going. In most cases, we will probably have environmental review that will cost over $100,000 for each one of those things. So there's a cost prohibitive aspect to this. So it'll only make sense for development that is of a particular size and particular level of standing that would then warrant the council review holistically on the site. The whole purpose of this is for the council to be able to look at a large site holistically and take everything into account rather than doing a process whereby you do one variance after another or you have to piecemeal the project. In this case, we'll give everyone the opportunity to look at the piece at the same time.
Thank you, Mr. Harney. I am a little concerned about this unequivocal legal answer that Mr. Garcia gave us in terms of not really sort of being sure in terms of having the case law to support the position that our charter is sort of, we can do this given the charter language because other cities have done it. I mean, I'd like to see the law that backs it up. I think that's key because while I do also think I see the usefulness as far as it being a tool to allow us to navigate around issues that shouldn't be dealt with in a draconian manner. But if it's illegal, it's illegal. If we can't do it, if it's against the charter, it's against the charter. I mean, end of the story.
Right. And Mr. Mayor, if I may, I feel confident in our opinion because we have looked at this before. It's been a while since, and when we started looking at this type of revision, I don't think we specifically looked at this, but this is something we've looked at before, and I feel confident. I just don't have the case at the tip of my
And
hand.
today, it's just we're introducing the ordinance, and
Right.
by the next meeting, when we're ready to vote for it, we will have something to that effect available to us. And also, I think one of the speakers made a comment that the homeowners associations, community groups, they haven't been heard from. Well, this issue has been around for a while, and in fact, it was on the agenda. It got postponed, right, like a month ago. So, to the extent anyone wanted to be heard, I mean, we're certainly, personally, more than welcoming for the views to be heard in City Council. But just, it is what it is at this point. Yes, Ms. Devine.
I'd just like for someone to address Mr. Nichols' concern that this might impact the Chevy Chase Country Club.
No, it actually doesn't. Mr. Nichols is correct that if the country club wanted to choose the PPD as it is, it would be able to use that. And this is really not in any way posed to somehow address that particular project, because that particular project could use this particular tool as it is right now. In fact, we're just looking at this tool because we think it's going to be something that's going to be in demand. We wanted to make sure it's up to date. That's all.
I mean, well, for example, since you've raised it, and this might be applicable to the country club, what is planned at the country club?
Well, I think it's really speculative at this point. There's nothing planned as far as we know. It's just they're
Well, we've been talking about it, and this might apply to the country club's thing.
I think because people in the community are talking about it, but
is it a banquet hall?
Well, I'm sure there's some banquet facility.
I don't know.
No. What we've been approached with is the overall rehab and overhaul of the facility as it is.
I'd heard that.
Yeah, well, there was a point where, and my information may be old, but where the owners were not able to make a viable go of it. New ownership has come in. They've spent money. They're looking to really do some kind of restoration and make it a more viable club for the community, for the Chevy Chase community. It sounds as though, and certainly backed up by what Mr. Nichol had indicated, that the Chevy Chase community sees the need to invest in and support the reinvigoration of the club. It would be quite a battle, I suspect, that if it failed and somebody came in wanting to do a subdivision, all heck would break loose, I'm sure, because that would so disrupt the fabric of that canyon. And I don't know if that's in anybody's best interest.
Okay, well, I don't want to create a panic, but let's say, since we're talking about examples of a PPD, could a PPD be used? Someone mentioned Mountain Oak, so these are the hot buttons are out there today. But could a PPD be used to change? This is I think it's recreational use, isn't it not, the country club? Could a PPD be used to change it from recreational use to R1?
Well, I would say no, because it still needs to comply with the underlying general plan designation.
Okay, so it all has to flow back to
absolutely
be consistent with the
underlying policy in the general plan.
The intent is not to get too far afield of the general plan and the underlying zoning. So when you're talking about two totally different uses, the PPD would not be the appropriate.
So it's more of a minor. You keep saying, and I'm trying to visualize how exactly this could be used.
If you'd like, I can give you an example. Sometimes you have a site where the underlying zoning provides for a particular bulk and mass all across the site. But it might be appropriate, because of the topography of the site, to increase the height and density on one side and reduce it on the other side, to make it much more compatible with the overall community context. As it is, the zoning code does not allow us to make those types of flexibilities. But if you have one large PPD, you can actually consider that. You can consider shifting density from one side to the other, shifting height from one side to the other, adding a plaza to one side where it wouldn't otherwise be required. That sort of, those sort of site-specific changes.
Where you have properties that interface with different types of zones. So in an entirely residential zone, probably not a very likely candidate for this type of tool. Something that abuts industrial and maybe medium density residential or commercial or institutional, like a school or college or something along those lines, then it makes a lot more sense to be able to use this type of tool.
And design review is still in the process. We're not getting rid of design review.
The underlying premises design. As you approve a PPD, you will also see the entire design to its fullest complete site. And the design will have to be approved along with the PPD, and only slight variations from the design could be allowed afterwards.
If I may, before it gets introduced, we have one minor change to section 3024.060D. It reads, just the first part talks about the changes to the physical aspects of a precise plan of development, which do not exceed 20% deviation from one or more of the numeric standards. It says in the Title 30, and it's really if it doesn't exceed the standards more than 20% of the approved precise plan of development. That's the change we want to make, and we're asking that it be introduced with that change.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Garcia, do you want the resolution adopting the next deck first or second? Do you want to introduce the ordinance now and do the next deck next week?
I would suggest just adopt the resolution now, and then we'll bring back the ordinance next week.
Well, I'll move 8A1 then.
Second. But Mr. Najarian, do you have a...
Yes, Mr.
Well, you're just introducing.
Well, he moved the CEQA.
I have a question about that.
Okay, so the CEQA question, despite on a neg deck, you said there still might be environmental review on individual projects.
There will definitely be environmental review on every individual
Every project is a project unto itself.
Also, the adoption of negative declaration does not impact you coming back with case law in support of.
No, that's in the ordinance.
Okay. So we
move
had
8A1.
Okay.
I seconded it.
Okay. Can we have roll call, please?
Councilmember Devine,
Yes.
Friedman,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Mayor Sinanian.
And I'll introduce the ordinance at 8A2 with the modification that Mr. Garcia mentioned.
Okay, it's introduced. What do we have next?
9B, Director of Public Works, continued from August 19th, 2014, regarding appeal of Transportation and Parking Commission, TPC, approval to modify existing preferential parking restrictions on 300 block of West Lexington Drive between Columbus Avenue and Central Avenue. 9B1, motion sustaining TPC decision to modify the existing 2-hour 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday to Saturday to a 2-hour 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. Monday to Saturday. 9B2, motion modifying TPC decision. 9B3, motion reversing TPC decision and modifying the existing parking restrictions to 24 hours, 7 days a week, parking by permit only.
Okay, thank you. And yes.
We have a very brief presentation to reset the issue. As you know, sir, this was held over. Council had convened its public hearing, wanted to allow Councilmember Friedman to come back, view the hearing, which I understand she has. Certainly she can speak to that, and then deliberate on this matter. By way of introducing Mr. Galanian's brief presentation to recast the issue, I would only submit to you that our approach has been incremental, trying to make marginal adjustments, because it is always easier to ratchet up than to ratchet backwards, because the other half of the equation is the unintended consequence. And I think that's really what animates the TPC decision that was made. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Galanian.
Thank you, Mr. Ochoa. Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, just a quick synopsis of our staff report. We had received a petition from the residents of 300 block of West Lexington Drive for a 24-hour, 7 days a week, by permit preferential parking restriction. The existing parking restrictions, as stated, are for 2 hours, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., Monday to Saturday, except by permit, for approximately 58 on-street, unmarked parking spaces. Over several days in January, February, and in June, we conducted standard occupancy surveys to determine occupancy level and also the number of vehicles belonging to non-residents. These surveys showed that on average, 70% of the street was occupied between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m., with 48% belonging to non-residents. Conversely, from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. in the evening, parking occupancy increased to 93%, with 62% belonging to non-residents. I'd like to mention that lack of enough on-site parking at the existing 20 apartment complexes and 10 single-family residences may have forced the residents to utilize on-street parking. With that, on March 24, 2014, after a lengthy deliberation, the Transportation and Parking Commission approved staff's recommendation of extending the existing restrictions to 2 hours from 6 a.m. now to 10 p.m. to improve the availability of on-street parking for the residents. The residents subsequently appealed that decision to City Council on June 3rd, and a public hearing was held on August 19th. With that, just wanted to provide a snapshot of the existing parking restrictions around the 300 block of West Lexington. As you can see in the slide, it's coming up shortly.
What's up?
Oh.
On full screen, though, so we can see it a little better. Thank you.
We have existing preferential parking restriction for 2 hours, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. on Salem Street, as well as West California between Pacific, just west of Central Avenue, which is only 2 blocks away from West Lexington. There's no parking on north side of Milford, only available on south side of Milford. That's only 1 block away from West Lexington. There's a pending petition for parking restriction and preferential parking on Pioneer Drive for 6 a.m. to 9. I apologize, from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., Monday to Friday. There is no parking available on either side of Central Avenue, west and east sides, from north of Lexington all the way to the freeway. There are parking meters on Central Avenue just south of Lexington. That just sets the framework for what the parking situation is like in that neighborhood. The next slide shows all the available parking regulation options that we have considered and shows a list of pros and cons. The first one, which is a 1 hour, 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., Monday to Saturday, and as a matter of fact, for that any period of time, the pros obviously are that they'll encourage shorter-term parking and provide more parking for residents with permit only. The disadvantages that we see, and the list is essentially a common denominator for all the parking regulations, are that they will have, as stated by Mr. Ochoa, the unintended consequence of shifting non-resident parking to adjacent streets. They may lead to underutilized parking as well as reduced turnover. It will require more residents and their guests to potentially purchase parking permits that they currently don't, as well as impact the service providers, and it will be inconsistent with Central Avenue and other adjacent streets parking restrictions. And, of course, it may create confusion for visitors to the area because of the inconsistency. Either 1 hour or 2 hours, 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., now Monday to Sunday, it's basically adding one extra day, Sunday. It will regulate parking on Sundays. It will be a pro for the residents, but conversely, a disadvantage for customers to businesses, as well as residents on other streets that won't be able to park on that street now on Sundays more than an hour or 2 hours. And all of the cons above will apply. For the residents' petition that they have requested, a 24-hour, 7 days a week, this will reserve parking for residents and their guests, again, with permit only, and it will regulate parking every day of the week. All of the above cons apply again, plus the fact that this will not allow whether customers to the businesses or residents on the other streets to park there at all any day of the week. The next slide highlights TPC's recommendation of 2 hours, 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., Monday to Saturday. We believe it's a good balance of encouraging short-term and discouraging long-term parking. It will be consistent with parking meters on Central Avenue. It will create less confusion for visitors because of consistency. It will minimize negative impacts to adjacent residential streets, and it will provide us an opportunity for an evaluation and incremental adjustments in the future if necessary. The cons, of course, are it may not address occupancy concerns after 10 p.m. and on Sundays. And also non-residents parking, again, will shift to some degree to adjacent streets. Currently, we have an approved preferential parking district in South Brand, which has a 2-hour 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. restriction Monday to Saturday. What we do in that district, upon request or complaints, we conduct parking occupancy surveys. And if we find that there hasn't been any improvements, then we, as Mr. Choa mentioned, we have the opportunity for incremental adjustments and evaluation to bring the occupancy levels to benefit and provide parking for non-residents. And those adjustments could be reducing the 2-hour to 1 hour, could be extending the regulation hours, or even adding additional days, for example, Sundays. We can conduct the evaluation as soon as 90 days after the implementation of the first set of regulation and take our recommendations for adjustments to TPC as soon as we complete the surveys. With that, Mr. Dombrowski, our parking manager, and I will be happy to answer you any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Golanian. I want to ask Councilmember Friedman if there's any need to open the public hearing, because I'm not inclined to do so. So if you're content with whatever the information that you've reviewed, public hearing is closed as it was at the last City Council meeting that we had on this issue. So questions?
Well, I have one question first, and then I have comments. And I did watch the whole tape. I watched everything. If you have, in our permit parking districts, where it's restricted permit parking, do you still have the requirement of moving your car every 24 hours, that kind of thing? Or can people park for a year? How does that work?
The standard 72-hour parking limit still applies.
They still apply?
Yes.
Okay. So I watched the tape, and one thing that struck me was that I thought that all of the council, that council members had different views, but I didn't think that anybody said anything that was wrong. I think that it's possible to all have the same opinions about there being a problem, about the pros and cons of different approaches, and then to come to a different conclusion about how best to handle it. I mean, it's just one of those situations where there's no perfect solution, where any solution that you pick has drawbacks. So, it's kind of subjective as to weighing those drawbacks and those pros and cons. Something that struck me is that, over the years I've heard this from people, and it seems very obvious to me in this situation that it's something that we should throw into the mix, which is the hours of our parking meters on Central. On Brand, people have complained that it's too long, that it should end at 6 o'clock. And on Brand, we have businesses that are open late, and we have a lot of restaurants there that don't provide their own parking. And you really see where having the parking meters on Brand until 10 makes some sense. But here on Central, at least at this point in time, when I drive down that street after 6, at 9 o'clock at night, 8 o'clock at night, those meters are empty. So I think we should talk about having those meters end at a certain period of time, and then could be used between 6 and 10 or 7 and 10 by patrons of the restaurant who don't want to valet park, who maybe are parking on Lexington now, and the residents of Lexington themselves. Because we've been talking about how to allocate those existing spaces, but to me, that's a whole bank of spaces that are underutilized. Do you have any figures? Did your analysis look at the use of the parking meters on Central from 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock?
Councilmember Friedman, we have not done that.
Okay, well, anecdotally, I can tell you that I don't think people are parking there at night and using those meters because they've got free parking on the streets around there. So I think whatever we do, we should have that conversation, and I would be for, and I know at some point maybe we'll have a whole lot of restaurants opening and we're revitalizing the area and there's a lot of stuff going on and it's something we should revisit. We'll probably have to revisit and tell the community, look, at some point when you've got a lot of stuff happening, we may go back to 10 o'clock or to midnight or who knows. But I think for now, whatever we try for the next few months, because I know we're talking about trying something for a few months, we should change the hours of the parking meters on Central in this area I'd say, end them at 6. So that would be my first suggestion.
There's no parking required down to Lexington from the freeway, right?
Councilmember Weaver, there is no parking available
I mean, you can't park on the
No, the
street.
red curve.
So we're talking from Lexington on south. How
Because you've
far?
still got, because even people going to the restaurant, even if they're really late, they're not so lazy. I wouldn't say lazy. They don't want a valet. They don't want to pay for the valet, or maybe they just don't want people in their car. I get that because I feel that way sometimes. But they don't want to walk a lot, but they'll walk probably 2 blocks.
How far south are you recommending? Down to the Galleria?
I don't know.
There's no
California.
parking by the Galleria either, so you're talking down to Broadway, I
Has to be
guess.
California. I agree with Ms. Devine. It's not practical.
Just the one block?
So.
No, I think at least 2-3 blocks. I mean,
So I'm trying to get an answer to.
well, I think perhaps if we're going to consider this part of it, that maybe we need that survey from staff about Central, because we're talking both sides, right? Doesn't have to just be the west side. It could be the east side as well.
Okay, so you're recommending the staff come back with that, we act on the other, and we come back, the staff
Perhaps
comes
if
back?
we're not comfortable with determining that right now, if staff's not comfortable with giving us a recommendation, then, and if we feel that we need more evidence, that's an option for us. We could do the rest.
If I may, I think that would have to be a separate discussion anyway, because it's not really
Okay,
part
so
of,
we could come back
part of
with
that and
that.
before you.
But I would like to have us take a look at that as part of this, but also giving relief to those other streets that are nearby.
I'll concur on that.
Ms.
As will
Devine?
I. As will I. Well, I was going to suggest that we agendize the fact that we change those hours in order to, that will give us 29 free parking spaces for that restaurant.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, we will absolutely conduct the occupancy survey, but it does not require council action to change the hours.
Okay. And it might be different, on the weekend, so we need to, you need to look at the weekend and the weekday separately. But that would be a suggestion of mine.
Strongly suggested by council, I guess.
On the issue of enforcement, that's still an outstanding issue that I don't have some certainty on. Let's say we adopt the staff's recommendation. What happens after when does enforcement stop?
6 months.
As we go through the process, we will periodically, as we do from time to time, schedule enforcement on a spot basis.
Right. It has to be, the periods of that periodical have to be such where it substantively makes a difference.
Absolutely.
Because again, it shouldn't be on the residents to call the cops, and then the cops come there. I guess they got to mark it first, and then they got to come back into it. It's going to be a mess. It's not going to be real enforcement.
So especially once we whatever change, presuming you make a change, whatever change we make in that phase-in period, you will have the parking control officers out there in the off hours, traditionally off hours, just to make sure that people get used to whatever the new restriction is.
There's no more discussion, I'll make a motion.
No, I.
Yes, Ms. Devine.
Discussion. Listening to all of this information, I want to say that Mr. Calfian, the owner of the restaurant, has done everything that he can, I believe, to provide valet parking for his customers. They choose not to use it. They choose to park on Lexington. Your numbers prove that. Over half were non-residents. Also, because of the parking meters and the timing on the parking meters, they are underutilized. That was in your staff report. Those people, they are not using those parking meters, and so they're all parking on Lexington. Since there's no parking enforcement after 7 p.m. and only it is enforced by the residents, I think that time extension approved by the TPC will have no effect on and will not solve the parking problem on Lexus that the residents are experiencing. And I know Mr. Weaver is concerned about what is called the ripple effect, but I can't make my decision on what might happen. I have to make my decision on what is happening. And so I am in favor of overturning the TPC decision and to approve permit parking only on Lexington for the residents, and that from from the alley to Columbus from 4 p.m. to midnight, with 2 hours parking by permit only from 9 a.m. to 4, 7 days a week, and on a 90-day trial period. See, what we've done and what the TPC is recommending has not worked. It's not working. And I just don't feel that we should extend it for 90 days. Let's try something different, see if this works. See if we can get the customers to park on Central and to park valet or find other parking. As I said, Mr. Calfine has plenty of valet parking.
Yes, Mr. Golanian.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Devine, I just wanted to clarify that we have not implemented neither the TPC recommendation changes or any other changes to the existing restrictions.
So he's saying it hasn't been tried.
But it does nothing except extend the hours. It helps them. It does not help them at all. Just extending it by 2 hours.
Well, I would say that would be speculation, Ms. Devine, because the new hours have not been put into effect. I think we owe it to at least our process of commissions to attempt their suggestion. And as Mr. Ochoa said, if that doesn't work, then we have a variety of other options available to extend the hours, to limit the per parking, make it 1 hour parking, extend the hours, deal with the parking meters on Central. Although I must say, a patron of that restaurant certainly is not going to be deterred by $1 an hour parking on Central. I'm a little concerned about opening that up because let's not forget that in that 1 or 2 block area, there's about 2,000 rental units, Lex on Orange, the Legendary, etc., Veterans Village down on Salem. It's going to be very crowded, and I don't want that to be filled with residents who find it easier to park on Central than to pull into their parking garages. So I think a reasonable ratcheting up of the restrictions as suggested by TPC would be a very moderate and appropriate step at this point. And should there be continued problems, then we have at our disposal many other options to fine-tune and to deal with these different configurations of restrictions. But I'm against, let me just tell you right now, I am completely against a 24/7 parking restriction on that street and on any other street in this city. Creates a very bad precedent, and it would be a mistake to do so.
Well,
the one thing that worries me about the 24/7 concept is because the image you're trying to portray out there is that we're friendly to businesses as well as our residents. Once you do that, you basically make it impossible for a business to have any overflow parking on the streets, and that's quite a drastic step to have. So that's always in the back of my mind on this issue. Yes, Ms. Devine.
I'm not suggesting 24/7. I hope that you understand that. I'm only suggesting from 4 until midnight. The businesses on that street, on those 2 blocks, have more than adequate parking behind. So they're not impacting Central at all. They have plenty of parking behind. And I feel that the 2-hour extension that was given by the TPC will only give the people that are parking there more hours to park, because the police are not going to get there for an hour. Then they mark the car, and then it's 2 more hours before they go back to check. So the people can actually park at any time and stay all night, or at least until 1 p.m. At least this way we give with from 4 to midnight or 4 to 11 or whatever, we give the residents a chance to come home from work, park their cars, and then whatever is left over, then if there are spaces, then the people that are going to the restaurant can park there.
Okay, Mr. Weaver?
Well, as I've said the last time, analyzing the parking requirements from the time the codes were originally set to today's increases the parking requirements, I think, some 400%. There's no way on any street in this city, including Glen Oaks Canyon on Glen Oaks, where you don't see additional parking on the streets. There's no way this council or any council is ever going to solve that problem. It's the nature of the beast. Husband and wife working, teenage children driving cars. Going up from one car when some of the codes were created to 2 cars to 3 cars to 4 cars. That's why you see them on all the streets where you never used to see them. So I'm willing to go with the TPC for now. It's a trial. I'd also like to see the results if you can just give us a report, not here, on Central, on how many cars are actually parking there. Maybe the Lex isn't open on Central yet. I don't know what's going to happen when they open there. Will they park on the west side and then run across the street? I don't know. But we always have the latitude to change. That's the great thing about the council. So I'll take the experts on the commission for now. Give it a try. The world isn't going to end in the time frame it's tested out.
Is that a motion?
So I'll move, yes. I'll move 9B.
I actually wasn't finished with my comments. I was only talking about one thing, but that's okay. That's all right. I'll just give my concerns about some of this, or some of my other thoughts, and some of it was discussed. But first, in terms of the new buildings, they have so much more parking than the buildings used to have that I don't personally think that's going to be a huge concern. I mean, I look at projects that are built now like ISIS, which is the one over on Colorado, which has no parking around it at all, I think. It's just some meters in front. And I've been there. I've been into that building. And that building has a lot of unused parking spaces inside of it, and it's pretty close to being fully occupied. I mean, it's got a lot of residents in there. When you go into the building, there's a lot of people in it, but their parking lot has so much space inside of it because our building codes now require a lot more parking than they used to have. So I think it's much more convenient for people in those buildings to park in their own garage than to try to park on the street and run across. I've lived in apartment buildings, and one of the great things about apartment buildings is, newer apartment buildings, is you park and you walk 20 feet to an elevator and 10 more feet to your door, and if you're someone who's carrying bags and stuff, it's a lot easier than trying to park on the street and crossing big streets and stuff like that. So I don't anticipate that as being contributing to this. This is because, as Mr. Weaver said, the old parking standards didn't require much parking, if any, and these are older buildings, and people live differently now than they did when they were constructed. And then you do have the businesses in the area and the restaurant, and people don't always like to valet, so they're parking on the streets. You've got all of those combinations. I'm not against following Ms. Devine's suggestion of having the permit parking from 4 to midnight, including 7 days a week. My concern, though, is how we do those permits. And I listened to the discussion last week, and I'm definitely against giving out as many permits to each household as they want to pay for, because you're going to end up with neighbor fighting neighbor. If someone's got 10 permits and they're giving them to all their friends and they're giving them to, to whoever to park all over the street, and then someone's going to say, as I heard somebody say last time, you parked in front of my street, in front of my house. Well, yeah, people can park in front of your house. They're public streets. And I hate to hear about people blocking spaces with their trash bins. I mean, these are public streets. They don't just belong to the residents. On the other hand, we want to make things as good for the residents as we can. It's their quality of life, and they live there 24/7. They're not just someone coming from a business. So if that will help, we can, that's great. I'm not convinced it's going to help all that much, but I'm willing to try it for a few months. But I'm not willing to give unlimited parking passes to everybody. I think what's reasonable is, I think Ms. Devine suggested, 1 or 2 per household. You lose it, you're out of luck. So we don't run into that issue of people constantly coming forward and saying, I lost it again, dog ate it, kid ripped it up, whatever.
Is that enforceable, though? Is that practicable? Can we do that?
It's very difficult. It is, because somebody always has a great explanation as to why they don't have it.
Yeah. So this is my concern, is people gaming the system that way. Someone's got 4 cars, they want to park them all, they try to get 4 passes, the next door neighbor who only has the 1 or the 2 gets angry, and you run into those conflicts. That's my first concern. My second is, I have a feeling that if you do this, you're going to end up doing the whole district, because you are going to have that overflow. Because if you have 3 cars and you get 1 permit, let's say, what happens to that 3rd car? Now in the past, now if you got there early enough, you could park it on that street. Now you can't. Now even if you live there, you can't park that 3rd or 4th car on the block. So now you have to go to the next block. So then the next block's going to want the permit parking because your block is parking there. So I think you are going to end up with end up with doing a district as opposed to doing 1 block. So that's my concern. So I've been thinking about this. I've been going back and forth in my mind. Like I said before, there's no perfect solution. Anything we do is going to have unintended and unforeseen consequences, and some of these foreseen consequences. So I don't have a strong feeling either way. I was hoping that you all would have some strong consensus and you could just convince me. I think everyone here is trying to do the right thing for the residences and to balance, what's good for the area and for the businesses. I'm not against that very limited permit parking, the 4 to midnight or 4 to 11, because I really don't see someone showing up at 11 to go to a restaurant. It's not in Glendale.
Well, I made a motion on 9B. One, if there's a second. Let's find out if it passes or not.
Roll call, please. Councilmember Devine?
No.
Friedman?
No.
Najarian?
Yes.
Weaver?
Aye.
Mayor Sinanian?
I'm going to state why I'm going to vote this way. I'd rather have the process go in the right direction rather than reverse. So try this out. If it doesn't work, we'll ratchet it up. If it doesn't work, we'll ratchet it up even more. And we can keep going until we reach the point of, the 24/7. But to ratchet it up to quite an extreme point, which is sort of new for us, and we see all these intended and unintended consequences, and then come back from it, it just seems counterintuitive.
Can I ask a question? With this scenario, they would have to appeal again, or can we do it as
They would not. I think at the last meeting, we specifically asked that question. They would not. This would be automatic. They would be.
Right. Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Friedman, there will not be a need for a new or revised petition to make incremental adjustments as we see necessary.
So with that, I will vote for the motion.
Is that a yes?
Yes. Thank you.
Can I ask how you're going to know whether it works or not? What kind of credibility? What kind of
Sure, Councilmember Devine. Essentially, our standard occupancy surveys will show if the ratio of residents to non-residents has adjusted after the change in the regulation. So if it's improved, then we know it's working. If it's improved insignificantly, then we can adjust it even more. And then we conduct another survey.
So this comes back automatically in 90 days with the evaluations, and also we were specifically having enforcement for Lexington, this area.
Mr. Mayor, the evaluation and suggested or recommended adjustment will go back to the TPC for implementation.
What about the meters on Central? You'll make the determination, or will that come back to us? How does that work?
Councilmember Friedman, the Director of Public Works has the authority to make that determination after we conduct the study.
So we can do it expeditiously as the need arises.
So in good faith, if you see that those are underutilized as parking spaces at certain windows, you will adjust the hours?
And just for full disclosure, the only thing I would offer to the council, and just by way of editorial comment, is that if ultimately we make adjustments that ratchet up the restrictions, ultimately we probably get to a point where west of the alleyway would be 24/7 permit only. East of the alleyway, which is the business side of the street, would be open and metered. But then we would have to come back and adjust those meters and make sure that there's an education process, an enforcement process that goes along with that. You're going to upset somebody at the end of the day.
You will also take Mr. Najarian's concerns to heart, because I also don't want a situation where there's no parking for a business because the meters are taken up by all the residents. So you'll look at that when you look at the usage too, correct?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Friedman, the preferential parking restrictions only apply to the frontage of the residential properties, not commercial, as Mr. Ochoa stated. We don't have meters on Lexington currently.
No, I'm talking about Central.
Right. So on Central, we conduct a study. If we see that the occupancy levels are low, it doesn't make sense to have them after 6 or 7 p.m., depending on what the study shows. We'll just adjust them for the time being. And a few months from now, maybe next year, we'll conduct another study when the developments have completed, and we adjust them accordingly.
And let me just ask a follow-up question. You also have the option, if you wanted to, let's say you made the meters to where after 6 they were free, you could still make that a 2-hour restricted zone. You wouldn't for people to park. You don't have to say you can now park your car from 6 at night till 7 the next
Councilmember
morning.
Friedman, that is very accurate.
So you'll look at that as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Ms. Devine?
And you will not do any of these changes until 90 days, so that all the playing field stays the same for the 90 days that this is in effect? Because if you change those meters before the 90 days is up, that could skew the figures.
Councilmember Devine, first thing we need to do is conduct the occupancy surveys.
Fine.
Right.
Well, though, if that helped, it might make any other adjustment unnecessary. So I'd say the faster you could do it, the better.
Yeah, we'll get on it as soon as possible.
The residents would like to be able to use those if they could, probably as well. They're nodding.
If Mr. Golanian states that the evaluation will go back to TPC, the residents are dealing with a significant problem with enforcement. For example, they're having to affirmatively call the police. And this is systematic. They're dealing with this constantly, and we hear about that. Am I not able to put that on the agenda? Put this issue on the agenda for discussion, or?
Our policy has been for the council members, if you want to agendize something, to bring it up and have somebody second and bring it back.
Okay.
But certainly, to the extent that as staff we put items on your agenda, I think between Mr. Golanian, Chief Castro, City Attorney, and myself, I think we hear the very strong sensitivity that the council feels to this issue.
So there's
the point is very well noted, sir.
There will be no difficulty getting a second to support that, and I understand what you're saying also. Thank you. Okay, next item.
Agenda item 12, oral communications, 5 minutes. Discussion is limited to items not a part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. Council may question or respond to the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. The city manager may refer the matter to the appropriate department for investigation and report.
Thank you. We have 3 speakers tonight. First speaker is Aram Kazazian, followed by Mike Moyhill.
Good evening again, council members. Aram Kazazian. The question I asked 2 weeks ago of the city manager of what happened to the $4 million that was allocated and is sitting in reserves plus interest for the improvement of the intersection of Central Avenue 134 freeway. What is the status of that funds? And you were going to find out about it. Did you have a chance to get it, Mr. Ochoa? That's one question I have, because I don't have an answer on that. There was $4 million put aside for the improvement of the intersection of Central Avenue and 134 freeway. That was done 10 years ago. Money was put aside for that improvement. I just need to know what's going on with that. The second item that I would just, I know we discussed it, I'll tell you, maybe central to Broadway is the street parking. It should be a 3-hour limit where we'll help those residents in that area too. Because people go for a dinner or something, 2 hours is not sufficient. They don't mind paying for it, but it should be like a 3-hour limit. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kazazian. Mr. Ochoa?
It's interesting, being relatively new, asking staff if there was $4 million from the Americana deal, what was it for, where is it housed, because certainly we could use it. No one can recall a $4 million deposit specifically for that project. Best as staff could recollect is that money had been set aside for capital improvements, not developer money, but city money, but it was to be leveraged with Caltrans money, which was not received. And most of it was a grant that wasn't realized ultimately. And so the money, not necessarily that money, if there was that money, was basically reprogrammed into other capital improvements. But it's capital dollars for transit. So if there was ever money set aside for transit, it would have been used for transit purposes and mobility and infrastructure.
Mr. Joe, are we talking about the off-ramp onto Central from the 134? Because that's where leftover money from the flyover bridge was going to be made available for that off-ramp.
As opposed to Caruso Americana money.
Nothing connected to Caruso.
No one really could put their finger on that. We're just trying to understand.
It's a flyover bridge.
Right. Maybe then, yes, sir.
Yes, Mr. Najarian.
I do believe that is money is available through the Measure R Regional Equalization Fund that we have. And I recall seeing that project listed with a price tag next to it.
Yes, Councilman Najarian, that is accurate. It's one of our long-range planning. It's not money set aside, but it's on the list of regional Measure R funds.
It's to add another lane off-ramp.
Well, I don't want to get too much into it, but there's more behind that as to when we can use the money and how much it's available. I'll just leave it at that for now.
Okay. And in terms of this 3 hours versus 2 hours, I have to say I've always wondered about the 2-hour limit anywhere near the restaurant district where people eat. I mean, God forbid someone decides to enjoy themselves and spend more than 2 hours in a restaurant. I mean, people shouldn't have to interrupt their meal and have to.
As somebody that never had and my wife never really had a warm meal for the time that our children were small. I don't think we were ever in any restaurant for more than 2 hours. I think it's
well,
a
that's
function.
Unfortunate. I want to change that. I want to do that for you.
I think it's a function of whatever the public works director can address in terms of standards practice.
You can do a survey on that too, right?
Can I address that actually? Because
Well,
I remember when the meters went in.
Sorry, we're starting to get into a little discussion
All right, never
here.
mind. We'll talk about it later.
All right.
Maybe
So,
Respond?
Briefly
Yeah,
respond.
Mr. Mayor, we're actually embarking on a pilot program to be able to extend your meter parking with a cell phone.
well, that's excellent. No, that I like. That's great. Okay.
We still wouldn't have had a hot meal though. But.
Well, since he said something, can I just say something?
Oh, briefly, please.
Briefly, part of the
Very
idea
briefly.
with having the meters on brand was to encourage people who were doing very short trips, like you're running into Portos to get a pie, to have a place to park. But when people were staying longer, the idea was to try to get them, to encourage them to go into the lots. So if you're staying for 3-4 hours, you would park in the lot. And that's the idea, because before, people couldn't go and run into Portos because people were sitting in those spots for 4, 5, 6 hours when there were no meters, or for 2 or 3 hours. So there is some utility to having more short-term parking spaces available, at least some of those 20-minute, let's say, spaces
Absolutely.
on the street.
It's designed to create turnover.
Yeah, turnover.
Yeah, maybe that. Okay. All right. We won't go into that because we could have a 25-minute conversation about that. Okay. Next speaker is Mike Mohill, followed by Vince Khachaturian.
Good evening, Mayor Sinanian and council members. My name is Mike Mohill. A couple of weeks ago, Councilman Ara Najarian, 9 years sitting on the council dais, making legislative decisions in reference to the inadequate parking near the Phoenicia restaurant excuse me, on Central Avenue, said, quote, pursuing permit parking would mean many residents would be left with nowhere to park because there aren't enough spaces to go around. The problem is, how about we just hold a raffle? Is that a fair solution? The problem is there are too many apartments with inadequate parking, said Mr. Najarian. Councilman Weaver shared similar sentiments that night. Councilman Freeman was absent at council that evening, but why did she, Najarian and Weaver, up until the April 2013 election, approve every mega complex presented on council without adequate parking? It was only on the eve of the 2013 election did Councilman Najarian say at a council candidate forum that he would no longer approve any new mega complexes going forward within the downtown Pacific Plan area, DSP. But that never stopped him and his colleagues from approving a new mega complex outside of the DSP at the corner of Broadway and Pacific, the Office Depot store location. Councilman Najarian used to be on the Transportation and Parking Commission before he was elected to our council, and should have shown leadership and know how the effect of 3,700 additional apartments would affect the traffic circulation within the DSP. Going forward, this council will continue to build outside the previously approved city master plan. Unlike the architecturally classy and beautiful city of Pasadena, We will now have another area of ugly buildings and inadequate parking and infrastructure. Congratulations, Council Members Friedman, Najarian, and Weaver, for changing the appearance of this once jewel city. Are you happy, Council Members? Many of the members of this community are asking the question, what have these council members received from the developers? Ladies and gentlemen in the viewing audience, please go to the city website and look at the individual 460 form of each of our council members to see who have contributed directly and indirectly to their political campaign. The damage has already been done. And today we are seeing just the beginning of the impact of thousands of new apartments in the central area of Glendale. The politically non-involved residents along Central Avenue and Brand Boulevard will now be fighting each other for parking spaces because this council and previous council approved mega complexes without adequate parking. Adequate parking. If council members were really concerned about the future, they would have pushed for more parking spaces rather than parking variances that only made developers wealthier. One should not be surprised in the near future if council will approve another bond for our children to pay for our mistakes to build a new parking structure. The out-of-town developers, their friends and council members will be long gone with their profits as the Glendale taxpayers will be left holding the bag. Thank you again, council members Najarian, Friedman, and Weaver, for caring more about the developers rather than the people who voted you into office to guard the public trust. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mohill.
Mr. Agani, all the apartment structures that have been built or are being built, do they all meet code for parking requirements?
Yes, to the best of my knowledge, they actually have been meeting code for parking.
Yep, that answers that question.
Mr. Najarian?
Well, since Mr. Mohill is leaving, I'd like to address this to the residents of Glendale. Ladies and gentlemen, do not listen to the man behind the podium, Mr. Mohill.
He's just left the council
Who has
chambers.
left. He is speaking lies. The truth is that before the election, during the election, and after the election to this day, I have fought harder than anyone else to prevent the growth, the excessive growth of downtown Glendale. The record of my discussions, heated debates, and arguments with our planning director, Mr. Hagani, with our esteemed city manager, with my colleagues, Mr. Garcia, and I got into it a few times, but for Mr. Mohill to say that I was approving these developments is completely a falsehood. The issue as to whether we're overbuilt obviously is a subject of discussion and debate, but what Mr. Mohill said is a flat-out lie, and I hope that whenever he comes to the podium, all of you listening to him question whether what he's saying is actually true or whether it's a spin for his ulterior purposes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Najarian. Next is Vince Kachatorian.
Good evening.
Good evening. Please state your name for the record.
Vince Kachatorian. I'm a resident of Glendale, on and off for the past 11 years. My concern is also related to parking issues, specifically between Glen Oaks and where the Verdugo Road merges with Glendale Avenue. Along this street where Ralph's supermarkets used to be, they used to have their employees park their parking lot, which is a 2-level parking, and we never had any problems. Now Golden Farms supermarkets moved in, and they have instructed their employees to park on the street. Now, you add Glendale Community College students also parking there almost all the time. And there's no parking for the residents of that segment of Glendale, which is from Glen Oaks north to where Glendale Avenue and Verdugo Road merge. And this causes immense problems for us, the residents. We come home, there's no parking, they damage our properties, they trash the place. I mean, I've seen numerous cars of my own car, my neighbors and others damaged. I mean, I've taken pictures, there's people will try to squeeze their car in a spot that's impossible. They bump your bumper, they hit the taillights, and they leave. And I would like to know if the council will consider some kind of a restricted parking for this purpose, because it's becoming impossible to find parking. And Glendale Community College is in session 11 months out of 12 every year. And that you add Golden Farms employees, and it becomes impossible to find parking.
You're talking on Verdugo Road, right?
No, Glendale.
I see the same thing on Verdugo Road side.
No, I'm talking about Verdugo Road, north of Glen Oaks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where there's that gas station there. What you
Arco,
yeah.
It's going up.
Exactly.
I see it every day.
Yes. Yeah. Damage to property, inconvenience to the residents, and littering.
Yeah, when Rouse was there, no problem.
Yes.
Golden Farms there, boy, that lot is filled and the street's filled.
Is it a restricted zone? Is it a 2-hour zone?
There's no restriction.
So there's no reason we can't, the city can't look at doing a 2-hour.
You can look at a survey on that, too.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Friedman, as I stated earlier, residential preferential parking restriction only applies to the frontage of residential properties. We have a process in place through the petition. If 75% or more of the residents apply for restricted parking, then we'll take that into consideration and take it to TPS for implementation. But you can call my office and we'll walk you through the process.
We talked to the business too, to the supermarket, and don't they have to park their employees on their property? There's something in our code about that?
That is a major kind. I'm glad that you brought that up, because Ralph's didn't require their employees to park on the
There's always
street.
plenty, yeah.
And now you add your Golden Farms adding their employees, you have no parking for the residents.
Okay. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Kachaturian.
Thank you for your time and listening.
Thank you.
Talk to him.
All right.
That's the last speaking card. What is next? New business?
I just want to say that city manager was just saying, just for the benefit of the resident who just spoke, that the city will write a letter to Golden Farms and talk to them.
Right.
That's a huge parking lot under there.
That's I'm sure they have no more. I mean, Ralph's had as many employees, maybe even more, and they never park on the street.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Kachaturian. Have a good night. New business? We have no new business. What's next?
We're going to adjourn.
We're going to adjourn in the memory of Ruth J. Charles, Jack Kabatek, H. Russell Smith, and Raymond Edwards. Do we have? Oh.
He moved it.
Second, and we're adjourned.